Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the November MTA Board meeting. Let's begin with a safety announcement.
Your safety is of foremost importance to the MTA. Therefore, we ask that you listen to the following instructions. In the event of an emergency, notify emergency personnel in the room, and 911 should be called. If an alarm sounds, wait for a public address announcement and follow instructions. If told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, leave all unessential items behind and use stairwell A just across the main hallway or stairwell D down the hallway past the elevators. An automated external defibrillator, AED, for use by trained personnel is in the main hallway just past the elevators. Thank you and have a safe day.
All right, thanks. Let me make a couple of opening remarks before we turn it over to public speakers. It's been a significant and eventful couple of weeks, and this remains both an exciting and challenging time for the MTA. As always, we are focused on safety, reliability, and service, and our core daily mission of keeping the region moving. On Tuesday, we announced that on-time performance for the subways shows sustained continued improvement, with weekday on-time performance reaching 81.5%, a nearly 16% improvement over October 2018. And the on-time performance number remains above 80% for the fifth month in a row. Thanks not only to Andy, Sally, and the Subways team, but also our partners in labor, hardworking men and women on the front lines of delivering operational excellence every day. For October, Metro-North reported on-time performance of nearly 94%, and Long Island Railroad reported nearly 92% on-time performance. Thanks to Kathy and Phil and their teams and the union folks and management folks at Metro-North and Long Island Railroad. We also marked another milestone in the rollout of Omni, the new contactless fare payment system, with the 3 millionth tap happening last week. This design-build technology project is not only on time and on budget, but also exceeding our expectations in terms of usage, both the rate at which people are tapping into the system and the range of cards we're seeing. There have been taps from 112 countries so far, 2/3 of all countries that issue contactless cards, and from every continent except Antarctica. We're calling visitors to New York from Antarctica with Apple phones or contactless credit cards to please tap in. Al Petray, Wayne Leiden, and the entire Omni team are continuing the system rollout, which will touch every borough by the end of this year. We're not only delivering strong operational performance and modernizing the system, but also making strides and commitments to larger issues as well, such as sustainability. We announced last week that the MTA has joined the ambitious UN climate agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over the next 5 years, in line with the Paris Climate Agreement goals. We're only the second government agency in the United States to commit to a program like this. As the nation's largest transportation system, we're committed to not only offsetting emissions by providing transit, but also ensuring that we are an energy-efficient organization in the way we run. I'll note that every year, MTA customers avoid creating 17 million metric tons of gashouse emissions annually by taking advantage of MTA services. Most critically, we're gearing up for the historic $51.5 billion proposed capital plan, the largest by far ever for the MTA. We've laid out a bold vision for reinvesting in our system and building a world-class transit network our customers deserve. Earlier this week, Bob Foran, Jana Lieber, and I appeared before the state legislative hearing at the invitation of Chairs Paulin, Comrie, and Kennedy on the proposed 2020 to 24 capital plan to answer questions from state legislators, hear their concerns, and demonstrate that we as an agency are committed, responsive, and ready to deliver on this unprecedented investment in the region's future. While we're maintaining operational improvements and delivering on our commitments, we still need to make continued progress towards meaningful change and reform. The transformation plan is key to making this happen. Bless you. Since the board approved the MTA transformation plan in July, we've been focused on preparing for and taking early steps towards transformation and reform. Senior staff within the agencies have worked together to review and refine the recommendations in the Alex Partners report and develop a more concrete roadmap for implementation. We released an RFP for expert external support to help us do the long, hard work of actually making the transformation happen. And we've launched an international search for new top priority leadership hires, particularly a new chief transformation officer. Yesterday, we were proud to announce the selection of a new CTO, Chief Transformation Officer, Anthony McCord, who's with us today. As our future CTO, Anthony will start in December. He will lead the MTA's historic reorganization and reform efforts and work closely with senior leaders across the organization to modernize all aspects of MTA operations. Anthony will be charged with delivering on the hard work of transformation itself, implementing the necessary changes to consolidate and streamline the MTA, and ensure the new MTA is set up sustainability for long-term success. Anthony is a senior corporate executive with over 25 years of experience in industrial service and infrastructure roles around the world, focusing on transformation and change management. He has worked with premier companies such as Veolia, which specializes in transportation, environmental, and sustainable energy projects, and Air Liquide, one of the world's leading medical and industrial gases and service groups. Anthony has experience in business turnarounds and the transformation of large, complex organizations, and he's proven to be a strategic leader with the ability to build teams and effectively engage stakeholders to deliver on projects and effect meaningful change. At the MTA, we look forward to the same clear focus and strong leadership from Anthony. Ultimately, this reorganization and reform will help position the MTA to deliver on our major goals of transformation and return to our core mission, dramatically improving day-to-day service, developing more streamlined and efficient ways of working, reinvesting in our assets by delivering on our proposed new largest ever capital plan, and running the modern, reliable, and efficient transportation system customers deserve. Finally, Bob Foran, our accomplished CFO, will be presenting today the November financial plan, including the final proposed 2020 budget. You'll hear the details from Bob shortly, but I want to note a few key things. First, the MTA continues to face significant financial challenges and sizable deficits. These are even more significant without necessary changes and cost cuts from transformation and reform. As previously disclosed, the AlixPartners report recommends reduction of up to 2,700 positions, primarily administrative positions, with priority given to attrition and vacancies. Secondly, the capital budget is solely dedicated to capital investments and can't be used to fund operational needs. Third, any budget fulfills multiple purposes. It's a financial document that provides a forecast of revenues and expenses. It's also a statement of priorities and values outlining what we, in a time of limited resources, are choosing to invest in. In this budget, you'll see a continuing commitment to our customers, as the proposed budget that Bob's going to present includes no budget-driven service cuts, and projected biennial fare and toll increases will remain below the rate of inflation. The financial plan also reflects our commitment to transformation and reform and reinvesting in operations so that the increases in performance we've seen in ridership and on-time performance continue. But as with any budget, it includes and requires hard choices. This one in particular is contingent on achieving significant savings, and I'll note that significant risks remain. You'll hear more detail from Bob in today's presentation, which is for information only. The final proposed 2020 budget will come before the board for a vote, for consideration, discussion, and a vote next month. With that, I'll turn it over to Leah Flax for public speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 19 members of the public registered to speak today. I'd like to remind our public speakers that in the interest of time and fairness to everyone, we limit everyone to 2 minutes. Please be aware of the clock in the front of the room and the warning light you will see reminding you that you have 30 seconds left to conclude your remarks. The first speaker is H.P. Schroer, followed by Christopher Greif.
Good morning. My name is H.P. Schroer, a veteran of World War II and director of UMIWI. On Veterans Day, people across the nation thank veterans for their service. New York City showed its appreciation by taking action. For the first time in over 100 years, and because of the hard work done by David Jones, and 250 veterans attending college were finally able to purchase a veteran's discounted card. This was a great first step, but there are still thousands more waiting. Unfortunately, our governor and certain legislators showed their appreciation by refusing to put up for a vote bills which would give all veterans a discount. I thought the hard part was accomplished when we succeeded in getting the bills supported by the public, supported by this board, and a majority of the governor's state legislators, including members from both parties. I was naive enough to think a meeting with Cuomo's Deputy of Transportation would result in the governor's announcing on Veterans Day his approval of a veterans discount. I apologize to my fellow veterans and promise, with the continued help from Pat and this board, to do better. The governor and the bill sponsors refuse to put the bills up for a vote because they don't have the money. With a budget in excess of $100 billion, they can't find the equivalent of 2 cents dedicated from every fare. It either shows they're not looking very hard or don't think a veteran's service and sacrifice is worth 2 cents. Where there's a will, there's a way. We have the
Please
will.
conclude your
and
remarks.
with your help, we'll find the way. Thank you.
The next speaker is Christopher Greif, followed by Murray Bowden.
Good morning, commissioners, staff, and honored guests. I'm Christopher D. Greif, executive member of the Transit Riders Council and advocate for people with disabilities. I also want to thank Sarah, who's in front of me. Yesterday, as you know, there was an incident on the train, but thank God there were staff and people did help accessibility people to get where they have to go safely. And thank God the B train was running and announcements were made. So a compliment to your staff, very well done. I'm also here to talk about Accessoride. As I saw it on the video conference on Tuesday, it is very important that we keep these programs on and on because it is important for people to go where they have to go. Doctor's appointments, supermarkets, especially getting on the MTA buses. We need to remember that we're not in the 20th century, we're in the 21st century. And we got to remember we got to work together accomplishing getting people where they have to go. It can be a senior. It can be a person with disability. Oh, yes, or a person, a lady who is pregnant. They still have the right to get on a train, still have to get a right, or a veteran, I apologize. A veteran has the right to get on a train or a bus safely so they can go to their destination. It is working very well, but as again, I say this again, we need to work together and work on peace because if we all going to fight, it's not going to help us. We're not going to accomplish anything here or any time. We need to think of working together as a team, not as an enemy. And I will remind that we can really work on the railroads like Long Island Railroad with their Long Island Cares, which does an excellent job, but I hope to see in the future with Metro North does a lot more accessibility cares and more information, and we can work together. Thank you, everyone, and happy Thanksgiving and belated Veterans Day.
The next speaker is Murray Bowden, followed by Robert Griswold.
Morning, John. Good to see you. When I needed an uplifting experiences, this is the place for me to come. I came early this morning and so many people greeted me warmly, glad to see me. It really made my day. The changes that are happening here are happening like nowhere else. Spectacular changes. The people that are coming on board are the talented people you can find. I take the information that I learn here and bring it other places because it's so good. Yeah, it takes time. There's a lot of work that has to be caught up. They started way behind, but they're creating as fast as they can. And yes, there is not as much money as that you'd like to see out there, but it's being used in the most productive way. It's bringing the most gain for the money spent. That's unusual. Doesn't happen anywhere else and I've been around lots and lots of places. You have to know that these people that are here and are doing their job spectacularly. I've stood here for years and years and years and asked all kinds of questions. These are the people that are actually answering them. I've talked to A lot of people sitting around this table this morning greeted them. They greeted me. You have a conversation, think problems get solved. If you don't have a conversation, nothing gets done. These people are all willing to listen to me. That's good. They're willing to listen to all of you. It just takes time, and they can't do everything at once. But they're working really, really well. For me, my grandchildren, thank you. You're doing a great job. Not just you, Pat. It's the whole team you've assembled. You're great.
The next speaker is Robert Griswold, followed by John Padula.
I'm Robert Griswold. I'm with the Mayday Student Organization. We've been coming to these board meetings for the last 3 months to speak in support of the transit workers and their contract struggle, but today I'd like to talk about a different issue. Capitalist exploitation not only lies at the heart of the transit workers' struggles, but is the fundamental cause for the neglect of disabled people by the MTA. Because the bourgeoisie does not see the working masses as human beings, but as vessels of labor to be exploited, as soon as we can no longer serve them in their pursuit of profits, they will ruthlessly cast us aside. The bourgeoisie sends the working people into wars and dangerous working conditions where they are frequently maimed, traumatized, and permanently disabled. They then leave us to fend for ourselves without even modest accommodations such as elevators or a functioning accessoride system. Only in a capitalist society could disabled people be treated with such barbarity and indignity in the midst of such opulence and wealth. But we believe a different world is possible, a world where disabled people are treated as equal members of society and benefit from social wealth as such. A world where the disabled are permitted to live and not just survive on the arbitrary and paltry charity and benevolence of exploiters. A world where common satisfaction of needs and not profit is the order of the day. We are struggling for a society organized according to the principle, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. And we call on all who stand for equality and cooperation to join us in this struggle. Thank you.
The next speaker is John Padula, followed by Diego Operman.
All right, where's the mic? Right here. Ah, okay. All right. Good morning, folks. I think everybody knows who I am by this point. So I'm from Vision Services, Department of Education. I also serve on the ACTA committee. Folks, I don't wish ill upon anybody here this morning, but I need to ask you all, what would you do if you woke up in total darkness tomorrow and the lights are out and you were blind? Would it be game over or would it be game different? And Mr. Patrick Foy, for me, it's game different. As I told you guys, it's a multitude of non-visual tools and methods that I utilize to compensate for my blindness. And as long as I get to choose when and how I utilize those tools, I'm free, I'm autonomous. And that's the way it was meant to be for all of us. We're supposed to have free will. And Mr. Foy, I know you had to make a difficult decision and it was handed to you from on high, but you know what? This is ridiculous. And you could tell Mr. Cuomo I said so. Nobody gave a damn about Accessoride for 28 years. The service was horrendous. The providers made money hand over fist. And in those early days, it was nothing but mobbed up contracts. The paisans were grabbing with both fists, making millions off of New Yorkers, disabled New Yorkers. And in 2017, you guys finally got something right. And now what? Now it's game over? You're pulling the rug out from everyone? Why? Because it was too good? People with disabilities were actually able to function, were able to contribute, were able to get stuff done in their day-to-day lives? Am I to understand that we're not to have the same access, the same rights, the same autonomy? Does this make any type of sense? Does anybody realize it's 2019? Anybody want to look at a calendar? I'm disgusted.
Please conclude your remarks.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Diego Operman, followed by Elias Besson.
Hello, I'm Diego. I'm a student at the New School, and I'm a member of the May Day Student Organization, which, in addition to fighting for a free and universal higher education for the working people, also links students to the worker movement against exploitation and oppression. In the midst of this transit crisis, the MTA Board and its agents have recently taken to talking emptily, though admittedly endlessly, about the quality of life of workers and riders. To this end, they've set 500 additional cops loose in the system. Where was this concern for the well-being of workers when the MTA Board delivered a contract that effectively cut wages, increased the cost of health insurance, all while dangerously lengthening the hours of work? Where was the board's concern when it became known that MTA workers were subjected to things including rat infestations, carcinogenic silica dust, asbestos, and injury and strain from repetitive motion for up to 13 hours a day? Where was the board's concern for quality of life when it demagogically painted targets on the workers' back, calling them criminals and throwing the city's transit crisis at their feet? Similarly, where is the board's concern for quality of life when passengers are subject to delays that can seem endless, when they struggle to make ends meet due to a high fare, or when they're left stranded in the cold for hours waiting for an accessor ride? How has the board's newfound sensitivity to life manifested itself? Absolutely predictably, as the public is subjected to vivid instances of police terror, as workers struggle for a fair contract, and as both workers and riders continue to be subjected to abhorrent conditions on a daily basis. The board has tried to set workers and riders against each other and obscure who the real opponent is, which is the capitalist class and its agents. This class and its representatives on the MTA Board have squeezed workers and attempted to grind the riding public under the police's boot. It's shown itself relatively unfit to make decisions on behalf of the working people. For this reason, the May Day Student Organization not only demands a fair contract for the workers of the Transit Workers Union Local 100, an immediate end to police brutality, repudiation of the bond debt,
Please conclude your remarks.
the abolition of the fair and a safe and functioning transit system through nothing less than full political power for the working people. Thank you.
The next speaker is Elias Besson, followed by Jackie Goldenberg.
Hello, I'm Elias, a student at the New School and a member of the MDSO, a citywide group linking students to working class struggles. I'm here to stand in solidarity with the workers of the TW Local 100. We renounce and reject all of the lies from the media, the MTA Board, and from politicians who all try to blame TWU workers for the transit crisis. They claim that workers are overpaid. Lies. They claim that workers take advantage of overtime. Lies. They claim that they are incapable of hiring more. Lies. They seek to divide the workers from the riding public, preventing a unified struggle against their true common enemy, this broken system which serves the wealthy and not the working people, including students like me. These lies reinforce and justify the rising incidence of attacks on workers and abuse by riders. Despite their lies, we know the truth, the MTA. Thank you.
The next speaker is Jackie Goldenberg, followed by Lisa Daglian.
I'm here as a member of the Elevator Action Group of Rise and Resist. We like to bring Governor Cuomo with us to these meetings to remind people who is the boss. Also, ladies, he's single. Instead of pointing the finger at the people on this board, let's blame him for these sorry facts. The MTA is out of compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. 1 out of 5 stations lack elevators, and when they are present, they may be broken or filthy. I'm not getting any younger, and all the feasibility studies and half measures are a distraction. Spare me the unpaid study committees and highly paid consultants, please. The 2nd Avenue subway, the most expensive track of its kind, looks nifty except when it rains. Then the ceiling leaks, so they say. Speaking of leaking money, a new transformation officer is coming our way, and I'm going to call him Hatchet Man. Enhanced subway stations look pretty, except when you can't climb the stairs to get to them. Elevators cost too much, but no wonder when bidding for contracts is limited. Something smells to high heaven, and it's not Pizza Rat. Hiring a bunch of cops seems plain weird when crime is down. The governor says the subways feel unsafe, but how would he know if he doesn't ride them? How's that show of security theater working out for you, Mr. Cuomo? When a bunch of cops have little to do, you can bet that they'll terrorize some kid, especially if the kid is brown or black. Looking at lots of cops with time on their hands makes me feel unsafe.
The next speaker is Lisa Daglian, followed by Mr. X.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Daglian, the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA, or PCAC. On behalf of our 3 councils and the nearly 9 million daily riders we represent, welcome Anthony McCord. We look forward to working with you. A key focal point of transformation is guiding the MTA to new ways of doing business. These efforts will be particularly critical given the authority's gloomy fiscal future, which we'll hear more about today, and about which we got a preview at Tuesday's joint legislative hearing on the capital plan. A quick note, there was a date conflict because the electeds did not know that committee meetings would be held a week earlier than usual. That can be remedied by posting the entire year's schedule on the website, understanding it's subject to change. We're pleased to learn that there are no planned budget-related service cuts as part of the 2020 budget. That is great news for riders. With increased ridership and on-time performance, and with the approach of congestion pricing, now is exactly the wrong time to cut service. We were surprised to learn that there has not yet been an analysis of how the capital plan will affect the operating budget. We're concerned that the good news will be short-lived without understanding the cost of operating expanded service that will come as a result of the agency's most ambitious capital plan ever. Clearly, it's more important than ever to find new dedicated operating revenue streams. It's a critical issue. We're committed to looking at all options and working with you and our elected officials to try and find solutions. While operating funds and the agency's finances were recurring themes at Tuesday's hearing, the capital plan was the raison d'etre. The department rules were raised numerous times with questions about their effects on competition and costs. A similar conversation was happening here. The lawmakers were not happy that the emergency rules go much further than their legislation and called on the board to review and revise them in advance of the December expiration. We joined that call. There's too much good in the capital plan to risk it with poorly designed rules. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. X, followed by Howard Birnbaum.
To the current MTA Executive Director, or should I say Bubba Ray Dudley, I'm here to inform you, you're not getting away with how you treated me here in the last 2 months. There are 2 things you need to do. A, you need to take the time and do it right like the SOS band, and B, you need to give me your love like Curtis Mayfield. You had the audacity to cut me off and then ask the MTA Police Department to help you move in on my parade. Therefore, you permitted your miscarriage to be carried out, which is improper. You embarrassed TW Local 100, which is also improper. And by the way, I'm saying farewell to your predecessor, and I'm also saying farewell to the fabulous Mueller and Mae Young, also Beavis and Butthead. Happy Thanksgiving, Bubba Ray Dudley.
The next speaker is Howard Birnbaum, followed by Valerie Joseph.
Good morning and happy Thanksgiving to you all. I'm here today to inform you that I'm getting complaints by the Guaya Depot in Queens that express buses drivers make 60 hours a week, and they get so tired at the end of the day and they fall in the street behind the wheel. It's dangerous. And number 1, I'm for the 2,700 cuts that you were supposed for, and also to let you know that how come the wheelchair people on the buses don't pay? Everyone else doesn't have to pay, because I'm getting complaints about that, and that's wrong. It's time for them to start paying, or I'll make sure there will be a transit strike in January. Have a happy holidays.
The next speaker is Valerie Joseph, followed by Jennifer Van Dyke.
Good morning, Board. Can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, Board. My name is Valerie Joseph. I was here on Tuesday to testify about the curb pilot program. So I tested it today on how you guys have formulated how it would work. Where did I end up? On the highway. I ended up at the intersection of, it was Rockaway Parkway and the Belt Parkway. So anyway, I was saying to myself, how am I going to deal with this afterwards? And how much is my ride going to be? Well, my ride came to be $90 today to get here from Queens Village. How would that be for you guys? I don't think it would be any better in the sense that my ride, the $275, yes, I know it's $275, but where am I going to come up with this $90 to come here to a meeting that's important to me? And also, I would like to add that I'm an accessory advocate, so I have plenty of other people asking me what's going to happen. I don't know what to tell them at this moment because I'm disgusted. I'm also going to say that there was a lady here on Tuesday that did not get a chance to speak. Why? Because she got here late due to her accessory being here late. And I didn't think that was fair, so I wanted to say that the next time she is here, I will give up my spot and have her speak. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
The next speaker is Jennifer Van Dyke, followed by Jessica Murray.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Van Dyke. I'm with the Elevator Action Group at Rise and Resist, and our mission is to make the subway system 100% accessible. And what we have found perpetually fascinating is that the MTA seems to be able to say that they are exempt from the Americans with Disabilities Act. A number of our group members are plaintiffs in the Sydney versus the MTA case. And this case was filed on April 25th, 2017. It is now over 2.5 years later. The case is still ongoing. You've gone through one set of lawyers. You've hired another set of lawyers at great expense. That expense you are not revealing to the public, not to the taxpayers who are paying for those lawyers. And what those lawyers are saying in the courtroom is that they are not, the ADA doesn't apply to them. Now, the ADA has been around since 1990. It is the law of the land. It is not optional. It is not a suggestion. It's not maybe later. It's the law. And almost 30 years later, you are tying up our time and energy and money in a court case that is unwinnable. And I want to quote from Judge Hagler, who is overseeing this case. He said in June of this year, already over 2 years into this case, there is no license by the MTA, by any other agency, to discriminate against any individual by race, minority, ethnicity, or disability. It is the law. The American with Disabilities Act is the law. It is not optional. It is not a suggestion. It is not maybe later. And I urge you, I actually rode up in the elevator with Sarah Feinberg this morning. I heard you speak on Second Avenue Subways. It's a Second Avenue Sagas, a podcast in which you stated that you and several other board members have said to Chairman Foy that you're not interested in pursuing lawsuits and ignoring the ADA. I applaud that, but words are empty until you act upon them. Please take action. Please do the morally correct thing. Please do the right thing. Acknowledge the law that exists. It is not optional. It is not a suggestion. The ADA is the law. Thank you for your time.
The next speaker is Jessica Murray, followed by Rebecca Balin.
So we know that Governor Cuomo doesn't care about disabled people or poor people. This year he's been willing to cut off funding to vital services. He's done nothing to address the affordable housing crisis, which is feeding the homelessness crisis. But he is willing to buy more police, which won't fix the problem. He's willing to hire attorneys to fight a lawsuit which was filed after he arrogantly broke the law with his Enhanced Station Initiative. And while the MTA is in such a dire financial state that they now have to make drastic cuts to the Paratransit On Demand pilot program, we're hearing that these cuts are necessary. So that is, following his priorities, we assume. In Tuesday's board meeting, we were told that these changes are in line with other cities. It is true that there's no other cities that have unlimited on-demand paratransit programs, but here's what other cities are doing for on-demand service. Chicago subsidizes $27 per trip up to 8 trips per day. Boston, $40, and it's based on the passenger's trip history, not an average of all passengers. DC, the subsidy is $15 up to 4 rides per day. And now with these new Access-a-Ride changes, the subsidy will be $15 and only 16 rides per month. That's not even a trip per day, not one trip per day. Meanwhile, you're spending $1 million to test an on-demand microtransit pilot program in Staten Island to give people easier access to mass transit. Is this program wheelchair accessible? Have you ever considered an on-demand feeder service as a way to cut costs without limiting access for Access-a-Ride users? There has to be a better way to control costs and make Access-a-Ride a comparable alternative to the inaccessible subway. It has not ever been comparable, which is required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Governor Cuomo doesn't have the right priorities, and this board is supposed to be independent. Please make decisions like you're not under his thumb. Thank you.
The next speaker is Rebecca Balin, followed by Jason Pinheiro.
All right. I don't know if you guys can see me. Thank you for having me here today. Hi to some of my favorite board members, David Jones and Veronica Vanderpool. My name is Rebecca Balin. I'm political director at the Riders Alliance. Not surprisingly, I will be focusing my comments to Governor Cuomo, who is not here today. But hopefully he'll hear me. The MTA, as you all know, has an operating deficit so big that we are hearing that you are unable to run more trains and buses and increase frequency. We haven't heard from Governor Cuomo a solution to that operating deficit. He hasn't proposed anything. Instead, what he has proposed, instead of helping working New Yorkers get to their jobs off peak hours, nurses, restaurant workers, childcare workers, the backbone of our economy, the backbone of our city, what we're hearing instead is that he's going to hire 500 cops. He's manufactured this crisis. We know from y'all and from other folks that crime is down on the subway. Why are we hiring 500 cops and what we've seen is to harass immigrant New Yorkers, New Yorkers of color who are putting their bag on the seat next to them, New Yorkers who are trying to eat a sandwich or just trying to get on the subway even though the fare or bus, even though the fare is unaffordable. What he's doing by focusing on cops instead of his job, which is to fill the operating gap, is he's pitting New Yorkers against each other and he's blaming vulnerable New Yorkers instead of asking us to look at him. New Yorkers won't be fooled. We are not going to fight each other. We know who's accountable. It's Governor Cuomo. So we demand that Governor Cuomo cancel his request for more cops, for 500 additional cops, and that he find revenue for the operating budget and focus on increasing subway and bus service instead. And I just want to add, even though I'm done, that I think it's very important that this, especially we're seeing the redesigns are revenue neutral.
Please conclude your remarks.
We need to be adding bus service. Thank you.
The next speaker is Jason Pinheiro, followed by Michael Howard.
Good morning, Patrick Joseph Foy. Good morning, Robin Mojica. And good morning to the rest of the board. I'm here to express my concerns regarding Anthony McCord. Anthony McCord doesn't have transportation perspective. Why I say this? Because I read yesterday the press report, right, Patrick Joseph Foy? You selected a businessman, not a person that's going to renovate in transportation. That's why I demand the full board to vote against Anthony McCord, because he doesn't have what it takes to manage or transform a transit agency like the Metropolitan Transportation Authority of the state of New York. And once again, I demand Bob Ferran to not impose no more fare and toll increases, because we pay $275. At least my employer, right, Patrick Joseph Foy, pay attention, please, because it's not fair that every time I come, every other board member ignores me. And the quorum should start in the House, right, Patrick Joseph Foy, like you did in the Port Authority, and I've been watching you since. And I'm going to keep watching you until you learn that when every public speaker speaks, you should pay attention. If they come with complaints or issues, you should take note about it and do every investigation, whatever it takes. So see you guys in December.
The next speaker is Michael Howard, followed by Rachel Foss.
Good morning, board. My name is Michael Howard. It's been like 6 or 7 months I haven't been here. My topic is about the A line and Fulton Street Transit Center. I notice whenever I ride the R46 equipment on the A line between the train operator or conductor don't even bother to control the heating system, especially when it's very cold. From Euclid Avenue to Owens Park and the Rockaways in both directions, just like the R32s and the R179s. I be feeling cold every time the doors are open at every Queen stop on the outside. At Fulton Street Transit Center, the men's room needs to be restored with locks in both stalls. Some of us can't even get privacy at Fulton Street Transit Center. And every time whenever I don't come here, I also send suggestions through email, like signage, for example, signage at Far Rockaway, Mott Avenue Station. All the bus transfers need to be changed. They need to take out Q22A and replace it as Q114. It has not been done since Q114 started running back in 2014. It's been 5 years I haven't seen no Q114 sign. Sorry that my time is up. I would just want to let y'all know.
Conclude your remarks.
Y'all have a great Thanksgiving if I don't see y'all.
The next speaker is Rachel Foss, followed by Omar Vera.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Foss. I'm the Senior Research Analyst for reInvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable state government. We are concerned that the MTA, once respected for its technical expertise, is making significant decisions based on feelings, anecdotes, and politics rather than data and objective professional assessments. On debarment, which we strongly oppose, at Monday's Transit Committee meeting, it was revealed that 3 vendors did not submit bids for proposals on a design-build contract because of the risks from debarment, risks that include factors beyond their control. Debarment is bad policy and a big mistake because it reduces competition, as we just saw on Monday. At yesterday's state legislative hearing, MTA leadership basically answered some legislators' questions by saying, just trust us. They provided few specifics on how they will manage $88 billion in total spending for the 2020-24 and prior capital plans. You are fiduciaries of the MTA and should be concerned. At the hearing, it was said that the 20-year needs assessment will be released after the CPRB approves the capital plan. This raises the question, how did the MTA determine how much restoring the system to a state of good repair will cost? If not the needs assessment, show us what was used. Second, the first sequence of construction projects will be released in the first half of 2020. Whatever level of detail is available now should be released before the CPRB approves the plan. Lastly, old debt will not be retired in meaningful amounts for at least a decade. MTA bonds have already been given a negative outlook by S&P and Moody's because of existing debt burden. The MTA should release a detailed debt plan. Lastly, we understand the MTA budget will propose almost doubling the size of the police force. What are the facts to support this? Overall crime is down and remains near historic lows. Citizens Budget Commission estimates 581 more officers will bring the deficit up to $1 billion by 2023. The MTA has failed to explain why a larger police force is the most effective way to address stated concerns about homelessness, public safety, and fare evasion. We and other independent analysts believe the MTA cannot justify or afford this large ongoing operating expense, and more police will result in direct pressure to cut transit service. For these reasons, the MTA board should reject this proposal. Thank you.
The next speaker is Omar Vera, followed by the final speaker, Shion Forbes.
Good morning, MTA full board. I'm here to discuss, well, for starters, I'm going to say wish Ronnie Hakem well. Under her leadership in New York City Transit, the W train returned and it's running better than ever. Although we could always improve it, like extending it to Brooklyn. Extending to Brooklyn, of course, and if my LaGuardia plan ever gets accepted instead of the air train that doesn't even plan to get to serve the Marine Air Terminal. The Marine Air Terminal is the original terminal. But yes, now let's discuss something really, really, really important. Really, I'm not happy what happened last night. As I was returning home from Macy's, we know that the A and the D were suspended along Central Park West because of fast track, but then the 1 also had a major switch problem going northbound at 137th Street right after the viaduct. This is just, you said you fixed the system, but here's the thing, it's only getting worse. I don't see any improvements. And these statistics that say, oh, we have the best, lowest delay since 2013, no. And personally, I don't think this board, no offense, but I don't think the board realignment of this year was the right call. Personally, I wish all the new board members should resign and bring back the old board members like Chuck Merdler, Peter Ward, and Mitch Pally. I miss them all, especially Freddie Ferrer. They may not be perfect, but they at least have their priorities. We do not need entire committees run by complete novices with no experience in the expertise. And yes, I'm looking at you from the FRA. Sorry, Fireberg, you should leave the transit committee. You should leave the board. You have no business being there. And this whole fare hikes that continue every 2 years, everybody, this is nonsense. We should be back at $2 at least. I miss my old MTA, and as for the other board members who are here, veterans, this is not an attack on you. I appreciate you do your hard work. This is on you. This is an attack on corrupt bureaucracies. And of course, I wish the timer would be 5 minutes. And seriously,
Please conclude your remarks.
So, I'm going to conclude my remarks right now, but you really shouldn't be sitting there because you have no experience in the expertise. Thanks, and I'll see you all hopefully in December if the time allows it.
Thank you to all of our speakers. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the public comment. Oh, I'm sorry. I failed to call the final speaker, Shion Forbes.
Just to clarify, that's Shion Horn from Forbes. Yes, thank you for your time. Oh, I'm over already? Okay. All right. I want to say that I have always come to this meeting assuming that you want the same things that we all do, which is for every person with a disability to have the same equity of transportation as everyone else in the city. But I was really disheartened to hear about this 16 rides a month, which is 8 round trips in an entire month. The minimum should be at least 1 ride per day, because for those of us that work, if you want us to get there on time, and if you want to contribute to employment for people with disabilities, this is incredibly important. I did get to see the meeting on Tuesday via YouTube the other day, and I want to say this. If this is a priority, I was shocked to find that the State Assembly does not know what is going on. If this is a priority, I was shocked to find that the City Council does not know what is going on. If you are truly doing everything you can to make the budget, then please inform the people that can make those changes if you cannot. I cannot believe that somebody came here last time and spoke about cancer treatment she needs in January, and she is not being accommodated. I'm so happy that it's being expanded to more people, but if you're looking for data over the next year, Alex, cutting these rights is not going to give you accurate data at all, because the entire point of this is that it's unrestricted. Yes, I understand there might need to be put limits, but they have to be livable limits so that people that are working, especially freelancers like myself, have the freedom to go over in a meeting that they may be needed for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the public comments.
All right, thank you to the public speakers. Before I ask for a motion on the minutes, let me just do this. Quoting the MTA website. Commissioner Feinberg served as the administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration. The FRA serves as the sole safety regulator of the U.S. rail system. Commissioner Feinberg was nominated for this post by President Obama and later confirmed by the Republican-led U.S. Senate. As FRA Administrator, Commissioner Feinberg developed and enforced rail safety regulation, managed the multi-billion-dollar rail investment portfolio, and led research and development and technology development programs. Commissioner Feinberg was the second woman to lead the agency of nearly 1,000 employees in Washington and 8 regional offices across the country. Prior to joining FRA, Commissioner Feinberg served as U.S. DOT Chief of Staff, where she provided strategic advice and counsel to the Secretary of Transportation regarding operational and legislative initiatives across all modes of transportation, and helped lead the agency and its more than 57,000 employees, period. The minutes of October's board meeting have been distributed to all members and are available on the website for review by the public. Are there any corrections or omissions? If not, may I have a motion to approve? Motion. Second, all in favor? Any abstentions or, thank you. With that, I'm going to call on CFO Bob Foran for the November financial plan presentation. Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you and also on Director's desk, you have several documents, an overview of the presentation I'm going to make, and then the MTA's 2020 final proposed budget and the November financial plan 2020 to 2023. There's 2 volumes here, and they're also going to be on the website available to the public. The first volume is the executive summary, and it also then summarizes what's in the second volume, which is agency by agencies, their operating budget and proposals. The first volume, though, also includes some policy policy recommendations and what we call below-the-line items. These are things that aren't embedded into the individual agency budgets, but are recommendations that we're making, which, if approved by the board in the December meeting, will then be built into each of the agency's budget. But again, this information is available to you on the director's desk, and it's available on our website following this meeting. So let me turn now to an overview of the 2020 final proposed budget and the November financial plan, 2020 to 2023. And as we've done, we always start with where were we the last time we made this presentation? Well, at the July plan, we included, we showed our operating results, including projected fare and toll increases, substantial cost reduction targets, and the transformational savings identified in the ALEX report. We were projecting at that time that we would have an operational cash balance, surplus if you want to call it that, in 2019 of $61 million. Now, as you know, we balance our budgets on a cash basis, basically meaning if we have cash at the end of the year, we can roll it forward into the next year to address deficits in that year. So we take the $61 million that we were projecting in 2019, we rolled it into 2020 in our projections and our forecast. It then ends up with an operational balance of $55 million. We then roll that in our forecast into 2021 to address operating expenses, and that gave us a projection of a $26 million deficit in 2021. The out years, the deficits increased. 281 was the forecast for 2022, and 433 million was the projected deficit in 2023. So what's changed since we looked at the July plan? Well, I'm going to show you things that are favorable, and I'm going to show you some things that are unfavorable. But the numbers that I'm going to present are the cumulative numbers during the whole plan period, what we're still seeing in 2019, and then what we are projecting on a cumulative basis through 2023. Now, the changes and re-estimates that are improving our financial performance is we're now forecasting higher fare box revenues due to increased ridership of $253 million during the plan period. Higher real estate transaction taxes of $203 million during this period, and then additional administrative vacancy control savings of $28 million just for this year. Now, vacancy control sounds, a little technical. Basically, this is the hiring freeze that we've had in place only for administrative positions. We have not had a hiring freeze for operational positions, and we've not had a hiring freeze for safety and security. But for this year, the hiring freeze on administrative positions has given us $28 million of favorable results. Changes in re-estimates worsening our financial results. We have higher New York City Transit and MTA bus wage adjustments, about $207 million. Changes in our estimates on rates for energy, health and welfare, and pensions, $145 million. Lower payroll mobility tax receipts forecast of $144 million. That's not lower than last year. That is just that the forecasts are being lowered. We're still projecting higher receipts over the prior year, but it's the forecast that has gone down since the July plan. We have higher New York City Transit public liability and workers' compensation estimates of 108, higher paratransit service expenses of 41 million, and lower toll revenues of 24 million. When you take these favorable and unfavorable cumulative results over the plan period, put them together with other changes, we're going to be worse by about $467 million over the plan period versus July. What are proposed actions that we have in the November plan that are continuations from what we did in July? Well, again, there are no budget-driven service cuts in this plan. We continue to move forward to implement the transformation plan to streamline MTA's internal processes and deliver service to our customers on a more efficient basis. We maintain the improvements that we have with the Subway Action Plan, which are funded with Phase 1 congestion pricing, and that's the for-hire vehicle fees that generate $300 million a year to continue to maintain that investment on the Subway Action Plan. And then we're continuing the assumption of biennial fare and toll increases of 4% in 2021 and 2023. And again, this is a projection. This is a forecast that we have of those potential fare and toll increases. They'll still be subject to public hearing, and they'll still be subject to board approval. But I do want to point out that the 4% that we're assuming in 2021 and 2023 are well below the forecast CPI, what inflation is in those two periods, of 4.8 and 4.9. Now, there's new actions and adjustments that we've built into the November plan. First, we're assuming a renegotiation with the City of New York for an equitable sharing of paratransit cost for a total cumulative effect of $361 million. And we'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. We're assuming additional savings from eliminating vacant administrative positions over this period, 329. And again, it's administrative positions. These aren't operational positions. We are going to have put extra constraints on our overtime management. We've got the report that's out there. We have a task force that's out there. We are working hard to see how we can control overtime. Some overtime is very beneficial to the organization, but there's overtime that we should be able to have a better control over. And if we do, we're estimating we could save at least $176 million. We are reducing the committed to capital contribution or pay-as-you-go capital in our budget of $30 million. And then we're reflecting for the first time funding of the state's $7.3 billion additional commitment to the 2015 to 2019 capital program. If you recall, the legislation provided that the state could either provide us the money directly or they could ask us to sell debt on their behalf, and they would then reimburse us for the debt service on that. We have started committing against the state's $7.3 billion contribution. I think we have about 4.6, almost $5 billion of commitments against it. We've started spending money, and we are starting to pay it with notes. And then as those notes mature, we will sell bonds, and the state will reimburse us through operating aid on an annual appropriation for it. And so that process is already working, but we're reflecting that, and so our debt service looks higher, but we're showing operating aid coming in, so it is a net, no impact to our financial plan. We had $350 million of annual budget reduction initiatives for our budget. We've reduced some of those because, again, some of those had service adjustments in them that we've now reduced. We've taken those out because no budget-driven service changes, and that has an effect of $317 million. Triborough Bridge and Tunnel capital program was approved by this board. It is not subject to the Capital Program Review Board, so we're already reflecting that now. The selling of the debt and the debt service is in this budget, and that has $184 million of an impact. Then we're replacing, upgrading, and extending the useful life of critical components at Metro North and MTA Bus on fleet and additional right-of-way and station maintenance for Long Island Railroad for a cumulative effect of $100 million. Additional actions reflected in the November plan. We have a reasonable, but I think conservative, reduction in the loss of fare box revenues from fare evasion mitigation efforts. It's $50 million a year is what we put in. We believe that that is just, it's a reasonable number at this time. As we put these measures in place and we start to see the efficacy of these measures, we believe that we should be able to do better. And we will then, as we monitor it, reflect it in future financial plans. But right now we've got a $50 million recoupment, if you will, per year from fare evasion mitigation efforts. We reflect the reimbursement that we expect from the Manhattan District Attorney for fare evasion cost of $40 million. And we've augmented the police department by MTA Police Department by 500 new police officers in support of the safety and security necessary for our customers and our employees. And that's $249 million. And then there's technology enhancements for fortifying operational technology networks and increasing risk management activities and control, about $50 million a year, or $199 million. Now, I mentioned that part of our financial plan is a renegotiation of the paratransit contract with the city so that we can have something that's more equitable in terms of sharing the net deficit. Well, since signing the agreement with the city in 1993, New York City Transit has assumed what had previously been the city's responsibility for providing paratransit service. Registrants, ridership, and net operating deficits is basically operating expenses net of fare box revenue and legislatively directed tax subsidies, have significantly increased since 1993. The net operating deficit right now is $11 million, what was $11 million in 1994 has increased to $549 million in 2019. That reflects the fact that registrants went from 25,000 in 1994 to 159,000 today. That registrant ridership went from 424,000 in 1994 to 94 to 7.9 million today. Now, the agreement with the city provides the city will pay 33% of the net operating deficit, but limited to no more than a 20% increase over what they paid in the prior year. So, based on the net operating deficit that we're projecting for this year of $549 million, the city will pay about $176 million, leaving New York City Transit to pay the remaining balance of $372 million, twice as much as what the city is paying. So what we are proposing is that we sit with the city, we renegotiate the terms of the paratransit service contract to provide a more equitable sharing of those net deficits. If it's a 50-50 split, it would reduce New York City's cost, New York City Transit's cost by more than $100 million a year. And I just want to point out, in many jurisdictions across New York, the locality covers the full amount of paratransit costs provided by the transit operator, including Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester County. Now here we talk about one of the most important things. It's the transformation of the MTA. The MTA is fundamentally changing the way we do business to deliver to New Yorkers the modern, efficient system that they deserve. We're committed to continuing the forward progress and raising the bar on performance. This historic transformation includes the centralization of all operating support functions to allow each of the agencies to focus specifically on delivering core service. Now, the new Chief Transformation Officer, Anthony McCord, will lead the transformation of the MTA, and he will report directly to the MTA Board. Through the transformation request for proposal, outside experts will assist with the top-to-bottom restructuring of the MTA, re-engineering all of our major business processes, and implementing the transformation roadmap. The TMO will support the Chief Transformation Officer with managing the outside experts and the transformation effort to ensure the changes are delivered effectively and successfully. Now, as previously disclosed, the Alex Partners report recommended the reduction of up to 2,700 primarily administrative positions with a focus on attrition, among other options. If we do this and we implement it correctly, the transportation net savings over the planned period will be $1.6 billion. Now, I do have to point out that we have a successful record of identifying and implementing and achieving annually recurring savings targets, and we're going to continue to work in that regard. This shows by November plan, which again is the basis for each of the budgets adopted by the board, what our targets were and what we've achieved. And as you can see, it's increased every year. And if we are able to implement successfully this transformation savings, by 2023, we will have reduced from our annual operating budget more than $3 billion of recurring savings. That's $3 billion of annually recurring savings that we'll have knocked out of our budget since we started measuring this in 2010. So where are we today? The November plan has these following results. And I have to say that significant deficits still remain, even after the projected fare and toll increases, the substantial cost reductions that we have in place, and the transformation savings. We're projecting now an operating balance of $143 million in 2019. Roll that forward into 2020. Basically, we're at a break even, $11 million of a balance. Roll that forward, a slight increase of $33 million versus the $26 million deficit that we projected in July. And we have slight improvements in our deficits of $212 million in 2022 and $426 million in 2023. But it's this next slide that I think is so important. This shows what our deficits will be if we don't achieve the transformation savings that are embedded in the report that you adopted this summer. Basically, no change this year, but next year, instead of basically breaking even, we'd show a $219 million deficit, a $415 million deficit in 2021, $717 million deficit in 2023, and almost $1 billion, a $900 million deficit in 2023. In total, deficits of $2.25 billion between 20 and 23, versus what we're now projecting is deficits of $638 million in the out years. The transformation plan implementation is critical. Otherwise, we're going to have unmanageable deficits in the future. The financial plan that I'm presenting today for your consideration includes significant risk. As we just saw on the prior chart, we have to achieve the revised ALEX transformation savings targets that are assumed in the plan. We have to achieve the budget reduction program initiatives that we built into the plan. It includes a renegotiation of the paratransit contract with the city to achieve equitable cost sharing. It envisions that we'll reduce fare evasion, that we will maintain fiscal control over controllable overtime, that we're able to negotiate affordable labor contracts, and then importantly, since we know we have now been in this long expanded period of economic prosperity, our revenue, our pension investments, our debt service, our operating and our capital expenses are all affected by the local, regional, national, and international economic. And so any economic dislocations or downturns could negatively affect our financial results. So with that, I'm willing to take whatever questions you might have.
Thank you, Bob. Regarding the 2,700 layoffs envisioned in the transformation plan, when will that start happening, and who will be making those decisions as to what positions are cut?
Thank you. First, it is a reduction in 2,700 positions. We hope that most of that can be accomplished through attrition. It'll be done in 2020. And in the ALEX report, since ALEX was saying we needed to be more efficient by taking these operating support positions and consolidating them, there are specific departments and specific targets by department, such as in accounting, such as in budgeting, such as in legal, human resources, that they believe that we can consolidate and we will need fewer positions. So each of the agencies will be given targets by those departments on what the reductions can be. And they can use vacancies, they can use attrition, but if need be, there'll be other measures that are taken. But it will happen in 2020.
But are we charging our new Chief Transformation Officer with that task of identifying the 2,700 positions?
The Chief Transformation Officer, my understanding, has reviewed the Alex Partners report, has looked at the Alex Partners report, and again, we have made modifications to it, but the whole goal is this is really focusing on where we don't need 5 accounting departments, we only need 1 accounting department. So it will be, basically, when it's all said and done, it will be what we need to operate efficiently and protect the, the fiscal integrity of the House.
And Commissioner, the reductions in positions would occur in 2020. Commissioner, the reductions in positions would occur in 2020, be affected in the second half. Nothing will happen in 2019. You're welcome. Commissioner Tessitore.
So I'd like to address something that I think Bob categorized as an item below the line and a policy change, which I have to continue to argue as a service cut. Just eliminating bus or train service and limiting that as the only definition of a service cut, I don't think is really responsible. Part of this plan is to eliminate accepting cash fares on board Long Island Railroad commuter trains and possibly Metro North commuter trains down the road in the future. And I think that is a tremendous disservice to our riders. I think passengers with disabilities, senior citizens, people that don't have the means to purchase tickets with credit, not being afforded the opportunity to buy tickets on board trains with cash is irresponsible. And the numbers to me don't add up. It's a $1.1 million savings to eliminate some administrative positions. To save $1.1 million, we will sacrifice over $7 million that we collect in cash on board. So we still have $6 million that we're in the black with that we're going to rely on other ways of getting. We're going to drive people to ticket machines that are approaching 20 years old. And I provided this information to the board yesterday through my labor organization in a brief. I don't get it. The numbers don't add up. And most importantly, I really think that we're not treating our customers fairly by eliminating that opportunity to use cash on board our trains. Stepping up tickets, extending tickets, stepping up an off-peak to a peak ticket for $3, we're going to refuse cash. And then when we refuse the cash, we're going to force them to use some kind of a credit card or a technology-driven option. And when they refuse, we're going to bill them with a tremendously flawed billing system that's not working. So I still deem this as a service cut. I'm sorry. I know people have disagreed with that, but I truly believe that it is, and I really, really urge this board for $1.1 million. I know I'm told often that, the big picture, we got to save money, but we're losing money on this decision.
Can I just respond? Obviously, first, the board's not making a decision on this item today. I'll just note the following, and if President Eng wants to supplement my remarks. One, cash on Long Island Railroad trains has declined 40% in the last 2 to 3 years. We expect that decline to continue. Second, Omni will be rolled out on Metro North and Long Island Railroad in the first quarter of 2021, presenting additional options to our customers. 3, customers getting on at any station will be able to go to a current vending machine or an Omni machine once the rollout has been continued, and will be able to use whatever form of currency they want, including cash, of course. This is an item that we ought to continue to discuss and consider. Phil, is there anything you'd add?
I think the real point is that anybody that wants to pay cash or feels the need to pay cash will still have an opportunity to pay cash. Anybody on the trains will not be, they will be allowed to ride through their destination. And Commissioner, as you mentioned, there's other ways. And as we see the trend going away from cash, we think that this is an opportunity to identify savings and one that we'll monitor closely. But But the fact is that anyone that does want to pay cash will still be able to pay cash, and that'll be either at the vending machines, at the windows, or by mail. And as you mentioned, they can still pay credit card, debit, and through use of technology.
So I understand that, and I want to urge my colleagues on the board to read the report that was sent yesterday for some more detail that I think is really important. And as long as we're acknowledging that as not being a disservice to the customers or a customer service cut to seniors and people with disabilities and people without the means to use all this technology, because there's a few people still out there that fall into that category.
Commissioner, the last point I'd make is we're going to do this as a pilot. So the entire revenue amount that you described will not be at risk, and we expect that revenue amount will continue to decline, and obviously it's declined at a significant rate. Dr. Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to thank Bob and the agency presidents, because I realize that this budgeting exercise took a lot of time. You did a lot of deep dives, and I appreciate the work that you put into it. Bob, you mentioned the risks associated with this. We have been cutting costs for many years now, and we've been successful at doing it and successful at maintaining it, but we're much closer to the bone now. And in my perspective, I see the risks as being much higher now than they were. I think some of the income expectations may disappoint us, let's put it that way. I'm also concerned that we continue increasing our bonding, and we continue trying to extend the useful life of some of our coaches and buses. There is an end, and we're going to get it sooner or later. It's kicking the can down the road. I kind of agree with Vinny, and I'll look into the specific that he raised, but I really think the devil is in the details. And we've just received some of the backup information that we need in order to understand what's really happening. I understand that we have been looking and searching for additional revenue and additional costs to cut, but we need to keep in mind that our commuter looks at the total cost of its commute in order to decide whether or not they're going to be able to afford to make that commute. And we need to carefully look at each one of the cuts or each one of the revenue enhancers that's included here. So I'm confident that Bob and the presidents will be willing to work with us and answer our questions in detail. And I think this conversation will continue in the coming month. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I have a few comments on paratransit. Bob, I think you've done a good job at communicating that there's a risk associated with this ask of $361 million over the life of the 5-year financial plan being received from the city in excess of the city's existing contribution to paratransit. And I think there's a very specious argument being made when comparing to the counties. And that's because Queens County, for example, doesn't provide its own, is not a transit system, right? It's not going to provide its own, it's not going to pay for the full cost, much like Westchester County. Westchester County, as a county, is not a transit system, but it must contract and provide transit services, which is why it's obligated under the federal ADA to support paratransit operations. The same with Suffolk County. But we are a transit system, and as mandated by federal ADA, as a transit system, it is our responsibility to provide this. Westchester County, again, Rockland County, Suffolk, Nassau, they're counties, they're governments, they're not transit systems. So they must, in order to meet the mandate of the federal law, they must provide this service. So I just want to be clear about, yes, it is true that these other municipalities are covering the full cost, but it's because they're not transit systems, and they must provide this service in order to provide this equitable service to their full customer base. As I made many lengthy comments during Tuesday's committee meetings on this, so I won't repeat them all, but I will say that I think before we are asking New York City to contribute more, I think that we should continue to look at ways to deliver savings and efficiencies within accessory. And I use the word continue very deliberately because I want to acknowledge the efforts that the staff has been undertaking for many years to actually achieve those efficiencies and determine what those savings could be. But I think what we need is a more strategic plan, a document of sorts, and nothing lengthy. It could be a few bullets that says, this is what our team is proposing to maximize some efficiencies. We heard some specific efforts by Craig Cipriano on Tuesday. For example, he said we're reducing the number of carriers from 13 to 10. So, that is a direct outcome. But I think we need to see something a little bit more clear, certainly more tangible, on what the paratransit team is doing in the division of bus to provide those efficiencies, again, before we start asking New York City. And I think it's important to recognize that New York City certainly does support operations in many other ways, particularly with MTA Bus. So I think when we're looking at the full totality of New York City's contribution, that needs to be balanced against this particular ask. And again, I appreciate that you've identified that as a risk, not certain, and that you've noted a conversation needing to be had with the city, which is certainly a different, a more collaborative approach than we've certainly heard in the past. With regard to the $249 million for the new 500 officers, I think that is it's an action that is preemptive at this point. So we know that we already have 500 new officers in the system that have been redeployed from other divisions and other agencies. That is what we're seeing. This is the proposal to add an additional 500 new hires on top of this 500. And again, I'm not making a statement on the need across fare evasion, across protecting the safety of our workers, across protecting the safety of our customers, in terms of terrorism threats that we as a transit agency certainly face. But I think we've not had a more robust discussion about what is our strategy here? We've seen some very unfavorable media and social media over the past several weeks. I think that is important to acknowledge, as many people have, certainly around this table and in the public, and our elected officials have as well. But I think before we're saying that this is the right number, we need to understand why this is the right number. I think we need to understand how they will work in concert with the existing 500 that are in our system. So this isn't a statement about whether or not this is, whether or not we have some real challenges in our system to address. This is about how are we using the data, and we've heard this before. Commissioner Lynn has raised this very thoroughly. How are we using our resources in the most strategic way? I also noticed that in this presentation, there's discussion about the transformation plan. Welcome, Mr. McCord. But I do not actually see any price or any cost affixed to this transformation plan as part of this initial summary. So I do have a question as to what are the operating costs associated with implementing the transformation plan, specifically for the new hires that are expected? And I think that's a very important component of this that I actually do not see conveyed in this presentation, as other very important elements were highlighted. So I would love to have an answer to that. And then lastly, I do want to lend my support to Commissioner Tessitore for his comments. It actually brings me back to the Easy Pass program and the MTA actually unveiling a program that allows those who are unbanked to still participate in the Easy Pass program by providing a ubiquitous opportunity for many customers to reload an Easy Pass even if they're not banked, using cash. And I think that there is still a very equitable argument to be made for those who remain unbanked, to still be able to use our system. There's a reason why to this date we've still not eliminated cash on our buses. We have done so on the express buses. And there's a reason why there was a very thoughtful program to include those who are unbanked in Easy Pass. So I do want to be very sensitive and thoughtful about those customers of ours who that we don't want to make it onerous for them to ride our system. Yes, there will be a mechanism to collect their payment. We've heard President Ng communicate that, but we don't want to discourage and make it more difficult. And there was a very interesting statistic raised by Commissioner Tessitore about 17% of payment being collected by those who are later billed on the system. And I think we need to have a discussion about how are we actually addressing and mitigating, if that is indeed an accurate statistic, that 17% collection rate of those who are billed. What is the plan to actually improve and mitigate that and validate that number? Let's be clear, validate that number. Thank you.
Speak to a second. The net reduction in cost from transformation, including the new hires, is about how much?
Excuse me, the net reduction is the 1.6 billion during the period of time. We are not showing the gross amount because the biggest element will be the hiring of the outside consulting expert through this RFP that's out there. And that number is something I just really do not want to put out there because I don't want to give any indication to any potential bidders on what we're budgeting for those amounts. So that's why I'm being a little, little subtle in terms of showing, but the net savings that we're expecting from the transformation is $1.6 billion over the financial plan period.
And the amount for the advisory firm is a one-time expense.
Yeah, one time over 2 years probably we'd pay, but that again is why I'm showing a net number. Yes.
Commissioner, could I also just speak to the paratransit point for a second? In 1993, the city made a decision to participate up to a third with a 20% limitation on the prior year's expense. And at that point, the city, despite the fact that might not have been legally required to do so, signed on for that. What we are asking for is a discussion with the city about a more equitable sharing, given the improvements in service which have unquestionably occurred, the greater transparency in paratransit, and the fact that, for instance, the e-hail program is being doubled in terms of the number of participants. The number of registrants, the number of rides, the expense has increased dramatically since 1993, and all we're asking for is a discussion with the city about an equitable way to share the expense.
Mr. Chair, respectfully, I've read that in the summary. I've heard that. I don't disagree with any of that. What I would actually like a response about is whether or not we can see a strategic plan for efficiencies and savings as part of that discussion and to inform that discussion. I made that a very clear ask twice, and it would be great to have that information as part of this ongoing discussion with the city. And also respectfully, I saw the 1.6 net savings. Of course, you've identified that, and not having a very clear number does not yield a good deal of transparency about, it's the one opaque area right now in this larger budget and these budget documents that I think is incredibly important to this long-term discussion.
Craig, at the December meeting, can you address paratransit and Access-a-Ride efficiencies and programs that have been put in place and the results we've seen to date, including, for instance, moving passengers from primary to broker, et cetera, which is a far more, better service and cheaper?
Sure. Rather than take up the time here, I will have it for the December committee. We'll go through the full briefing because there are a number of initiatives that we have undertaken and will be undertaking to rein in and cut down on paratransit costs with the hopes of being able to reinvest in other services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that, and thank you, Craig. I just want to be clear. While I appreciate hearing this in December, I do want it to inform the conversations with the city. So whenever that happens, if that does happen in the interim between now and December, the city should have that information as well. Thank you.
I mean, if Craig, if you know it off the top of your head, why don't we just talk about it now so it doesn't hold anything up? That's just an idea.
Well, yeah, I guess sure. Executive summary of some of the things we're doing are as we mentioned, we reduced 3 carriers over 400 vehicles in our primary fleet. We're working with our brokers to do more shared ride and to make that more productive. We're currently working with our software vendor, course, the next generation software will be able to do better scheduling based upon real-time traffic conditions, and we're hopeful that'll also be able to save some costs. Currently, we have a call center RFP that's going on right now, which we're very hopeful that the next generation of the call center will be able to do some things in the call center that'll contain some costs. So those are just some of the highlights that we're doing. I'm happy to provide more detail, but I think as you'll see, I'm not in the detail here. The 2020 budget for paratransit does show a reduction from the 2019. So while trips are increasing, we do anticipate that we'll be able to contain some costs and to bring some costs down in the near term.
Commissioner Albert, Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, one of your early slides showed keeping rolling stock in service for a longer period of time. I'm wondering if the additional costs of keeping an old fleet, and the R32 is a perfect example, the oldest in the Western Hemisphere, I believe, in service, has costs associated with it. So are those taken into account when you suggest keeping older rolling stock and vehicles?
Yes, those are reflected in the budget.
Is a reduced performance for those vehicles reflected somehow?
I would leave that to the operating agencies to say. Andy?
Yeah, we have a fleet plan, Commissioner, which shows not only the availability stats and the financial assumptions around that, but also shows the progressive phasing out of older rolling stock and the progressive influx of newer rolling stock with the higher performance that you'd expect from that. That's all factored in, both in terms of logistics and in terms of the associated dollar amounts.
Great. Can we get copies of that report?
Sure.
Or?
Yeah, we can
Terrific.
give you that.
Thank you.
We have a fleet plan that we can share with you. That's okay.
Thanks.
Commissioner Schwartz.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that on the paratransit issue, there are separate issues here, okay? And I want to make sure that we're not confusing. There's two things. Everyone on this board, whether it's paratransit or any other category in the budget, wants to find efficiencies, cost savings, to be able to run the system better from a customer service standpoint, from an operating standpoint. No one here, we've done a lot of that over the last few years. It's reflected in the presentation of the amount of money we've had to save, either because we were forced to do it because of out-year deficits or because it was the right thing to do. And so we've done this, and including passing and approving the Alex report was another example, an indication of us having to transform this agency to make it more effective operationally from a customer experience standpoint. And I think in the area of paratransit, it's no different. You have two issues here. One is equity. We're asking them to meet with the City of New York and ask them, this contract that was negotiated between New York City and the MTA was done like 25, 26 years ago. The world has evolved and changed since then. All we're asking is to sit down with the City of New York and talk about equity in the funding of this program, which has grown tremendously in the number of riders as well as the cost of the program. And this agency has made a lot of changes. Some of those changes were made through the leadership of Commissioner Vanderpool, who headed up a working group on paratransit. Some have been done by Craig and by others involved with the New York City paratransit program. It's with on-demand and the popularity of on-demand, which is just increasing the cost. So my thing is, there's two separate issues. One, yes, we should continue to find ways and work with ways to try to find efficiencies in paratransit as we should in other category. But a separate issue is to have a conversation with the city about equity funding of this very important and valuable program. Just like the city came up with equity funding with the Subway Action Plan, just the same way the city has stepped up and increased their capital commitment share, we now should sit down with them and talk about a different formula, a different share when it comes to New York City paratransit. So it's two separate issues. How do we reduce costs or do cost avoidance savings with paratransit? But the second thing is it's also talking to the city about coming up with a new equity formula share when it comes to this important program.
Mr. Jones.
To this point of equity, has there been any extensive discussion before this was put forward with the City of New York as to this proposal and what might be required before the city would contemplate it? Or has this just been sent out and so what has the discussion been? You know, I always get concerned when something's put out in the public and there has been no sort of background and pre-discussion to make sure that this might actually happen.
Commissioner, there were meetings with the city as far back as when Commissioner Polly Trottenberg was still an MTA board member. Those discussions were inconclusive, and we look forward to continuing discussions with the city on these and other issues. Commissioner Lacewell.
Thank you, Mr.
Commissioner Samuelson, Commissioner Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob, I would like to commend you also for this crystal clear presentation and commend the whole team for what is clearly extraordinary effort to find savings in the face of budgetary issues. Many of us know how difficult that can be. I remember when the governor came in 2011 facing a $10 billion deficit and being able to bend those cost curves so that services can continue is obviously vitally important. And I just wanted to comment with respect to the paratransit issue, whether or not the city is obligated to participate fully. I would think that our great progressive city would step up and deliver for these communities that express themselves vocally at every session of this board. And I believe many, if not all, board members, including, of course, Commissioner Vanderpool, who's led in this area, want us to be able to do more for those communities, and I hope the city will participate equally in that.
Commissioner Samuelson, Commissioner Mack.
Yes, specifically, I have a couple of questions about the report.
I shut my mic off already. I didn't even get started.
Union brother, give you a mic.
All right. Just on page 2 of the report, it says higher New York City Transit and MTA bus wage adjustments. Specifically, what does that mean?
So,
who got the wage adjustments?
Well, there's wage memorandum of understanding, but the biggest elements that are in here is we had less than expected reimbursable work, Commissioner. So we were expecting a certain amount of reimbursable work that would come in that would reduce our operating budget expenses, and we had less reimbursable work, which meant that it hit the operating budget. This also includes savings that the agencies built in terms of labor costs that were double counted, if you would, between the Alex report. Those are the two biggest areas, between the Alex report and what they had already put on the table. So those two are the biggest elements there. Less reimbursable work than we had estimated, and also that there was labor savings that the agencies put into their budget reduction programs that Alex also included in theirs, so we had to eliminate one. Those are the two biggest things.
So it doesn't include wage increases?
Well, that,
to any category of workers?
Yeah, there are adjustments that we've made that what we built into the budget, as I think we've said numerous times, is we built in a 2% increase across the board for all of our employees, and that's the basic element there. So that didn't change since the July.
Yeah. So I guess specifically my question is the New York City Transit and MTA bus wage adjustments. Do they include annual wage increases for any category of employees of the MTA?
Not in that number, not in that increase. Nothing. So, Commissioner, nothing changed in terms of our basic assumption on the wages between the July plan. It's still the same 2% that we built in.
But the answer to Commissioner Samuelson's question is yes. That they were included in the July
plan.
Included now.
Yes.
Yeah, but then it wouldn't be an adjustment.
Yeah.
You suppose that the entire way through.
Yeah, that's the same. It's
So,
in there.
so specifically, my question is, it's kind of a yes or no question. Does the adjustments that you're referring to, are they adjusted because a category of employees received an annual salary increase?
No.
Okay.
No.
If you go a couple of pages later and it says new actions, adjustments reflected in the November plan, that page, it says reduction in 2020 committed to capital contribution from PAYGO, which is the fare box, and it says 30 million. So you redirect, you change costs and stop 30 million bucks going from the fare box into the capital plan.
Yeah.
at previous briefings and probably in a previous meeting as well, I had asked the question of how much pay-go capital is going to be in the plan over the next 5 years, and I was told a couple of different times that I would have that answer. So now I see on here that there's a redirect of $30 million back from the capital plan into the operating budget, which is good because a system that's flush with capital and not flush with operating money shouldn't be taking money out of the fare box and putting it into the capital plan when we're flush with capital money. So my question is, and it's a very specific question, how much money is going into this plan now with the reduction of $30 million from the fare box into the capital plan?
We took 64 million out of the pay-go in the July plan. We're taking another 30 million out of the November plan. That leaves us, David, what was about 60 million, I guess?
Over the life of the capital plan or annually?
It's just this year.
So
Only
$60 million.
64 million out of the 19 we took out of pay-go, and out of 19 for the November plan, we took another $30 million. And I think that leaves us with about I can't remember the number, David, another $40–50 million in this year. But we have not touched next year's pay-go.
All right, so you take, so just to be clear, you're still taking 40 or 50 million bucks out of the fare box, which is operating money, and putting it into the capital budget where we're flush with cash. So and this came up with the state Senate hearings the other day as well. We're running the risk of having a system which is pristine, beautiful new equipment in place, and not having any operating money to maintain it, but yet you continue to take money out of the fare box to pump it into the capital plan at the risk of this brand new system falling into a state of disrepair because there's no operating money to maintain it. You understand what I'm saying?
Oh, Commissioner, I understand what you're saying, but I will say that in the 15 to 19 capital program, we did have a significant amount of pay-go capital. And the reason we have pay-go capital is the concern that many commissioners have, the amount of debt that we're selling. And pay-go capital is just one way of keeping ourselves from over-leveraging the system. Now, when push comes to shove and we need it for operating, we'll pull it back. And that's what we did in July. We pulled it back and put it back into the operating budget because we were hurt. And we're doing that now. So we're doing this strategically to keep from having to over-lever the system by selling too much debt. But when we are in dire straits, we have pulled it back in to the operating budget. So we have, in dire straits, we pulled it back in.
All right, just to be clear about everything, crystal clear, we're bargaining a contract right now, and we're being told you have no operating money, but yet you're taking tens of millions of dollars, wage points worth of operating money that could be used to settle our agreements so that this system doesn't just continue to pressurize and transit workers get treated fairly and respectfully, as we've heard some of the speakers testify to. You continue to take money out of the operating budget, put it into the capital budget where we're flush with money, and then tell the unions that you have no money in the operating budget when you're taking money directly out of the fare box to pay for capital work that we're going to be flush with cash on. Well, that makes no sense. I just want everybody to understand that to be the case, and everybody to understand that that is leading to the ongoing frustration of transit workers. Because it's my sense, because I've seen this movie before many times, that if we were to settle a concessionary contract, which we're not going to do, if we were to settle a concessionary contract, all of a sudden there would be a pullback into the operating budget of the pay-go capital that you had slated to pay for capital. As soon as you cried poverty and got what you need out of us, the money would come right back into the operating budget, and you'd have no problems at all. That's the way I see it. That's the way transit workers see it. I'm sure that's the way my union brothers on this board see it. And that money that's going from the fare box into capital is money that should be injected into this contract settlement to avoid whatever conclusion this is going to come to, whatever ugly conclusion we're on the way to right now.
I understand what you're saying. I would just say that between the July plan and the November plan, we're taking $94 million out of the capital program and putting it into the operating budget because we need those dollars in the operating budget. So
there's still $100 million this year alone. $100 million bucks, enough to settle our contract and make all this pain go away.
We don't have $100 million left in pay-go capital in the budget.
What's it? I thought you said $100 million.
I'll get you the number.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And lastly, I just have one last question. You have CPI forecasts for 4.8 over a 2-year period. That's 2020 and 2021? That first 2-year period?
Yeah, that would be 21 to 23 and 23 to 25.
So 21 to 23, you're forecasting into your budget a 2.4 inflation rate.
And that is an overall CPI rate.
Yeah, that's what I meant by that. So yes, it's 4.8 over 2 years, which could be thought of as an average of 2.4 in those years, beginning in 21, you say, right?
21 to 23, and then 23 to 25. It's forward progression, not backwards. Yes.
What's, if I may ask, what's the rate, the CPI rate that you're assuming for 2020, next year?
I don't have that right in front of me. We get our CPI rates from an outside economic consulting firm.
Okay, so I'm assuming that rate would have been in a document a couple of years ago, as it is in this document, forecasting ahead.
Yes, it would have been.
Yeah, so could you please get me that number?
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Mack.
Well, my only comment regarding the city and power transit, 25 years is a long time, so I think it's well overdue.
Commissioner Feinberg.
I just wanted to make sure I understood the conversation that before David spoke that John was asking Bob, because I want to make sure I understand it. So you're saying that, so John's concern is money going from the fare box to the capital plan. What you're saying is, if I understand correctly, that net total more is going from the capital plan into operating. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
In
Does
this
that
year-
is that your understanding? Did you I did not. It took me a while to figure that out in the conversation.
I'm not sure how you just characterize that, but my understanding, I think it's objective, it's in this report, is that there is money coming out of the fare box going into the capital plan. Not only this year, but next year
That's
as
what-
well, and the year after, the year after, and the year after.
Right. That's what I thought too. But I think what he's saying is the opposite.
No.
This year, it is the opposite. We are taking money out this year to balance our budget next year. I mean, we've already taken 64 million out. We're taking another 30 million out that we'll use to balance next year's budget.
Yeah,
So
but you-
out of this year's pay-as-you-go capital, we're taking almost $100 million out of the capital and putting it into operating.
Well, you're returning it back to the fare box, basically. It's not that you're taking it out of capital, you're putting it back where it came from.
Yeah, but
But you're not taking it in entirety. That's the question I began with, is how much pay-go capital is going to be spent by the MTA. In other words, how much fare box revenue is going to be used to fund capital projects in 2020, 2021, 2022. And you answered it before. You said, I'm going to have to go back and look at the videotape, but you answered it before, and I'm assuming you were right about the answer before.
Yeah. So what we had $64 million that was left in this year's budget, and we took that out. Next year, we have $123 million in the budget. We're going to take $30 million of that out.
So that leaves you with somewhere under $100 million, close enough to $100 million. That's what I thought you said. I said before $100 million.
And for next
year, I get it. Okay. I get it for 2020. So there's still $100 million coming out of the fare box going into the capital budget, even though you've reduced the amount, thankfully.
Commissioner Schwartz, Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, I think, look, I think it's legitimate to have this discussion as well as many other discussions before we adopt the 2020 budget, whether we should have any pay-go in the 2020 operating budget, or whether it should be a smaller amount than what is presented before the board, just like we need to have conversations of whether or not we're going to raise Metro North parking fees, whether or not we're going to continue to collect cash on the Long Island Railroad. So I think that this issue, along with a number of other issues, need to be discussed with the board prior to us having to take a vote to adopt the 2020 budget.
Commissioner Brown.
I'm sorry, just to respond to that, I don't want this to be mixed into a bucket with parking fees at Metro North. This is huge amounts of money that we're talking about here, when the whole entire conversation from the beginning of this meeting onward is about how the operating budget is starved. And in this report, we're being told that $100 million still next year is coming from the fare box into the capital budget. That fare box is operating money. That fare box is for service improvements. It's for the day-to-day maintenance of the system. It's for repair work, inspection work. It's not for capital work. It's a bit of a perversion that it's being taken and pumped into a capital budget, which is soon enough going to have a lot of money coming in from congestion pricing in some other areas as well.
Commissioner Brown, Commissioner Jones.
I agree with Brother Samuelson that it's a perversion, but it's a perversion that's baked into the cake here. Because in addition to the issues he raised, it's the debt service going forward that will be paid out of the operating budget as well that will drive a lot of these problems. I notice in here you got the you're taking credit for the 7.3 from the last plan, paying off that debt service, but for all the weight that congestion pricing is supposed to carry for the capital plan, the fare box and the operating budget is carrying a lot of the weight for the capital plan going forward as well. Now, I got a couple contradictions here. The longer I sit here, I started out with one or two, but after I hear the debate, it piles up pretty quickly. But one of it's sort of a language question I got here. And sometimes when you see these redundancies, it masks a deeper issue. And back here in the last page here, the significant risks in the November financial plan, maintaining fiscal control over controllable overtime. And that takes us back to an earlier page, new actions and adjustments. Cost avoidance achieved from fiscal constraints on controllable overtime, 176 million, which is what, 35 million a year, something like that. You're taking credit for. What do you mean by fiscal constraint? What are the fiscal constraints? You're going to impose further fiscal constraints on overtime, or you're going to remove fiscal constraints? What is the practical character of that? And then that'll lead me to another question once you answer that one.
First, when we talk about controllable overtime, I'm not talking about weather. Okay, I'm not talking about emergencies that come up. When an emergency comes up, we expect that our agencies and our workers will respond as necessary. So again, that's not what we're talking about. But when we schedule overtime and we plan for specific overtime because the decision is made that it's the efficiency that's necessary, we want to make sure that we're not overspending in those categories. And I think we all agree that that's the type of thing. We have the Morrison Forster report that came out that gave us a number of recommendations that they would like to see us implement. Those are fiscal recommendations as well. And so we are committed to implementing that report's recommendations, and it'll be done over the course of this year. We've started already, we'll continue to do. That's the things, the commissioner, that I'm talking about doing and the agencies are putting in place. We are adopting the recommendations that came from the report, and we are also making sure that management and supervisors are focusing on what we're doing is the right expenditure of money.
Commissioner, can I just jump in before you go on to your second question? Can we go to slide 13?
Kindly do, because truthfully, that lacked the sort of specificity I was looking
Well, then
for.
why don't you follow up, and then I'll jump in before you second. No, please, Norman.
All right, so, and I'm, defining controllable overtime, I accept that definition of controllable overtime, and you use that frequently, and you have an overtime analysis here. What I'm questioning is, you just said you're getting 170. First of all, there's a lot of other contradictions built in here that feed to that. You're asking the agency president specifically, to work with an older fleet, relatively older fleet going forward, and that's going to cost you $100 million a year. Now, they're supposed to do this with fewer managers, which is, I don't represent managers. You can get by with me. I would assume that will be more self-directed employees that will be coming up with those savings. I don't know how the agency presidents are going to achieve that while they're cutting supervisory people, but you guys are predicting that. Now, but you're taking $176 million credit for controllable overtime, and then in this year's report, mid-year forecast versus actuals, programmatic routine maintenance was 34 million unfavorable. So granted, there may be you guys have alleged a history of abuse. What do you use the word? Fraud and abuse? Is that waste, fraud, and abuse in overtime? But I assume that over the last year, you've been exerting maximum scrutiny over the overtime. Yet, you're coming up with 34 million unfavorable in the programmatic overtime. Yet you're taking credit for 176 million in savings on programmatic overtime. Now, I don't see how one leads to the other. I'm not saying you don't balance it out somewhere else in here, but that looks like one of my key contradictions in here, and that's a big chunk of change.
Commissioner, may I say, the 176 is over 4 years. It's basically $44 million a year. And so it's not 176 versus 34.
Right.
Okay.
No, but if you're losing 34, this is year to date 34 million in programmatic maintenance overtime this year. So, which is which over the course of the entire year will be roughly what you project as savings is actually been realized as increased costs. So, that's one basic contradiction here. Now, then back to the first page here. There's a couple things here that I find, I know you said you rely on outside experts for economic forecasting, and, people, what do they say, economists correctly predicted 7 out of the last 3 recessions. But you got here higher real estate transaction taxes. You're expecting to realize $203 million in expected real estate taxes. And then you've got down here, too, on the same calculation, you're expecting lower payroll mobility tax receipts. So real estate transactions are planned to go up while payrolls are planned to go down. I don't see how those two.
One is a mortgage. The real estate is the mortgage recording tax. It's not the transaction of the urban tax, and it's not the real property transfer
Yeah, so
tax.
you're assuming a huge increase in unemployment here.
And you kind of missed on the payroll mobility tax. I didn't say that the revenues were declining. I said the revenue forecast has been lowered.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And that's a difference. Okay.
Right,
That is
right.
a big difference.
No, I know. No, and by the same token, the 203 million in real estate taxes doesn't change in real. This has all changed since July. So the same people are making a conclusion that there's going to be more real estate transactions. At the same time, there's going to be more unemployment. Right?
We had a lower mortgage recording tax forecast in the July plan, and that reduction did not come to fruition. We've actually seen increases relative to the July plan forecast. So, this is a plan-to-plan change, so it's not necessarily just what's happening now, but it could also be, and it is, maybe our forecasts on the prior plan were not as accurate as they turned out to be.
So Norman, let me jump in on 3 points before you go on to your next point. Can we go to slide 13 for a second?
How do you know I got a next point?
You said you did, and you always do. I say that respectfully. Slide 13, Farebox, $6.4 billion, total amount $17 billion. The point I want to make on this is that while Farebox is important, it's less than 40% of our revenue. That's point 1. Can we go to slide 4 for a second? 4, please. And the point I wanted to make here, just to be clear, what's happening on bullet 4 on page 4 is reduction in 2020 amounts committed to capital contribution. So we're taking that amount from capital and putting it back into operations. The third point I want to make is the following, that doing pay-go and putting it, making those types of changes are not irrational for the following reason. One of the reasons our operating expenses is so high is because of deferred maintenance over a significant period of time, which has led to higher operating costs, and I'll also note, reduced customer service, on-time performance, et cetera. So putting those amounts into capital where appropriate and where available is actually a logical, reasonable business thing to do. Norman, did you have a second point?
Yeah, well, this is more strictly math question that I think you'll get right. When you say 4% fair and total increases, you don't really mean 4% fair and total. You mean yield of 4%
Yes,
after
net revenue
elasticity
yield.
is
Yes.
all right. So that's satisfactory there.
Actually, if I can comment on what you said, it's not logical at all. This whole entire conversation is machinations about how to infuse money into the operating budget through slicing and dicing. So it's not, and to say that the fare box revenue is less than 40% of the overall budget, it's the number one source of revenue for the operating budget. And so you are taking, it's 40%. Nothing else even comes close except taxes. So the fare box delivers more money into the operating budget than taxes do. So you can try to dismiss the idea that it's illogical to take money from the fare box to pay for capital projects. I don't think you're fooling anybody, though. Nobody's going to believe that. You're on the it's sort of like you saying that these are non-budgetary service cuts.
Let me
Of course they're
just make,
budgetary service cuts. You're saving money on them.
let me make a point about pay-as-you-go capital. If I have a $100 project and I spend money today on that, I have avoided future debt service for 30 years, okay? That delevers our system. That puts less pressure on the fare box going forward. That's the reason we have a small amount of pay-as-you-go capital built into our budget, because it just eliminates debt service in the future. So if I take that pay-as-you-go capital and put it back into operation as we're proposing doing next year and as we did this year, that's increasing my debt service every year for 30 years. So, John, doing that has a negative effect on our operating budget for many, many years in the future. It is not imprudent. It is a fiscally responsible thing to do. Board members have complained about the amount of debt that we're having to sell. This just mitigates it in a very small degree.
You're paying for it out of the fare box, though. You pay that's.
I'm paying debt service out of the fare box, John.
I understand what you're doing, but the bottom line is that 40% of the revenue in the operating budget comes from the fare box, and you're taking that money and putting it into the capital budget. There's no denying that. You can say it's for whatever reason you want, but that's what you're doing, and you're doing it in the midst of announcing service cuts. And I'm not saying you're doing it, Bob. I understand it's Pat doing it. I get that. I don't want to kill the messenger.
Actually, I'm picking up on some comments that Commissioner Schwartz made and Commissioner Samuelson. The other elephant in this room that I'd like some real in-depth look at is the $250 million to be spent on 500 new police officers and how they would be deployed. And of course, that money comes essentially, hits the expense budget and increases the number. And also the fare evasion mitigation. I think Bob Lynn, Commissioner Lynn, pointed out that the problem is in buses, primarily, in Bronx, Staten Island, and yet the image the public gets is young black and brown kids jumping over turnstiles as the main problem, who should be wrestled to the ground by police officers. This is not the way to come up with increased amounts of money, since almost, I think, 2/3 of it is a bus problem. And it is creating a rather explosive, situation in the communities that I know about and am trying to represent. So I would like an in-depth dive on this. I'm not prejudging it. Maybe, good explanation for it on the safety and other sides. But again, putting another hit on our expense budget of that magnitude is going to have serious consequences, both in terms of the people who are actually operating the system, making sure that they're protected, and that's a key priority. But also interchangeably, this has been argued as a major way to reduce fare evasion. That keeps coming up and then dropping out. So I would like some deep understanding before we make this vote of those two issues. Thank you.
I frequently speak after Commissioner Jones on this subject, but as a very frequent subway rider, there is massive fare evasion in the subway system. It is all walks of life. It is not just the folks that you described. And I notice where there are police officers stationed near turnstiles, it does not happen. Unfortunately, we can't have them anywhere. So getting more of them to address that issue, plus quality of life issues, plus danger issues, plus possibly preventing a terrorist attack on our system, I think is a prudent use of money. And as long as it's, as you are recommending, equally applied throughout the system. I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Commissioner Feinberg, Commissioner Glucksmann.
So on the policing issue, so my understanding is the money that is being held over, placed in the budget, or the planning for the money that's being placed in the budget, doesn't mean that we are executing on hiring. It means that we are planning for this hiring. Doesn't mean the hire. So, and people keep talking over and over again about the 500 cops that are already in the system. It has not happened because we have not done it yet. We have not hired the cops. We have just started a recruitment process. So that's number one. Number two is we clearly need to have a policy, as we talked about on Tuesday, we clearly need to have a policy conversation about this. This week and over the weekend, when every newspaper was focused on a vendor issue, which I totally get, and I think it's also a policy discussion that we should have, one of our bus drivers woke up an inebriated person on a bus who had not paid the fare at the end of their shift to remove them from the bus so they didn't sleep all night on the bus, and they were attacked and beaten. Okay, so we have a problem. That same night, we had someone who was stabbed in a subway station. So this isn't to scare people. We have an incredibly safe system. Overall, the crime numbers are down, although major crime numbers are up, and we've got a problem that we have to address. But, you know, let's continue to have the policy discussion. Let's talk to folks who feel strongly about the issue. Let's talk to the policy community. Let's have a conversation on this board. But the budget numbers reflect the planning for hiring, not the fact that we have already executed on 500 new police agents or new police officers who are in the system. It's not true.
Yeah, so let me speak to the police issue for a second. Of the 500, 88 or so will fill vacancies as a result of attrition. They will be deployed on New York City Transit, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad facilities. The leadership of the police department will make deployment decisions at the time in terms of what is the best use of those highly skilled police officers. At the September meeting, we heard a number of TWU speakers who talked about the increase in physical assault, and we also heard from female transit workers about sexual assaults on the subways. While the subways remain safe, robbery arrests are up, hate crimes are up, especially anti-Semitic hate crimes. And then I don't need to point out to anybody in this room that not far from where we meet today was a terrible act of terrorism on 2001. Transportation facilities across the world, Madrid, Belgium, Zaventem Airport, London, etc. Not far from here, the Port Authority, 42nd Street and 8th Avenue at the end of 17, there was an attempted act of terrorism. Fortunately, no one was hurt and there was no substantial property damage, but those risks are real and remain with us. Commissioner Glucksmann.
Thank you. As a commuter or customer representative, I support Commissioner Tessitore's remarks about keeping fare collection. And I'm not going to repeat the reasons that he said, but I support that. As far as the measuring the health of the organization with the administration, what are the ability to is going to affect the ability to attract talent as the culture of the organization is it healthy, and what benchmarks are being used to measure that for with the transformation?
Anthony McCord will be executing the Alex Partners Transformation Report. Metrics are in the process of being developed. Anthony has hit the ground running and, for instance, is looking at the RFP, which is out. He will be joining us in December and reporting regularly to the board and the public on the progress on transformation, including the financial goals, but also the operating goals and the customer service goals. Norman.
Yeah, one more thing. I promise this should be it. But the one thing came up again in the debate with John, and I understand you got to move around the table, but when you refer to, I promised myself I'd always bring this up every time it came up on the table, so that's why I'm burdening you with it now. That when you mention the fare box recovery ratios, they capture a lot of the push and pull in the budget. It captures a lot of how much of the capital plan is being funded by the fare box. It captures a lot of what's going on, and I think that it also captures a lot of how deep reform is really needed on this system. These are the highest fare box recovery ratios in the country. Is anybody going to contradict me on those numbers? That particularly among commuter rails, the fare box recovery ratio on Metro North is the envy of every other property in America. Not quite the envy of Long Island Railroad, because it's very close behind on fare box recovery ratios. These are very basic gauges of the efficiency of the system, and ours are the highest in the country. And you can look at that in a variety of ways. Now, I'm curious as to what your projections are for the fare box recovery ratio going forward. If we're, because if you're going to be driving all these savings you're alleging in here, really one of the things that's going to happen is fare box recovery ratio is going to go even higher, should go even higher. Of course, standing room brings out more, a higher fare box recovery. There's a lot of negative things bring out a higher fare box recovery ratio as well. Now, again, you're asking the agency people to do this to get drive a higher fare box recovery ratio with older equipment and fewer employees. I don't see the logic in that, but if you can achieve it, it's a special sort of magic that accountants do.
I just make the following comment, Commissioner Brown, which is that the policy in effect to increase fares below the rate of inflation is going to have a significant impact on fare box, all other things being equal, and obviously many of those factors will change in the months and years ahead. Anybody else? Commissioner Law.
Yeah, I just felt the need to come to Bob's defense a little bit. I believe budgets are all about policy choices. And you could disagree with the choice and you could disagree with the policy, but it doesn't mean it's a perversion or if it's illogical or irrational. Slide 13 showed that 17 cents of every dollar we spend goes to debt service. A policy choice could be we should do more pay-go so we don't increase that 17 cents to 18 cents or 19 cents. Because the more we increase the debt service, puts more pressure on the fares, provides less money to do other things. And so, again, it's policy choices. We could disagree with the policies, but there's a logic to them.
Thank you. Commissioner Mahica.
I just want to clarify so we all know what we're talking about when we talk about fare box recovery ratio, right? It's not about the amount of fares that we're recovering as collected fares. It's the amount of fares as it relates to our total operating expenses. So as operating expenses continue to increase because we're driving those costs higher and fares do not increase along with that, then the amount of the fare box recovery ratio actually goes down. So it's not actually how much we collect in our fares, it's actually how much we collect in fares as a ratio of our overall expenses. So just to clarify that point.
Especially in an environment where fares are going to increase less than the rate of inflation.
Exactly, Chairman. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, well, obviously I don't disagree with the very definitional approach to it, yet my position is it's the highest in the country.
Well, among the highest if you look at the FRA data, but we don't need to debate that. Anybody else on this? All right, good. Good, robust discussion. Why don't we move to the Committee on Finance?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is one action item for board approval. This action item requests the board approve an extension of the Energy Services Program Agreement between the New York Power Authority and the MTA. The committee recommends this action item, and I move it.
Do I have a motion? Second, all in favor? Any abstentions or noes?
I recuse myself from the NIPA vote.
Thank you. Any other abstentions or noes? Thank you. Commissioner Schwartz.
There are two non-competitive procurements for $17.1 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I make a motion to move them.
Do I have a motion?
Second.
Second, all in favor? Any abstentions or noes? Thank you. Commissioner Schwartz.
There are three competitive procurements for $4.8 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I make a motion to move them.
Second? All in favor? Any abstentions or noes? Thank you.
There are three real estate action items this month described on pages 56 through 61 of the board book. distributed for this meeting. The committee recommends these real estate items, and I make a motion to move them.
I second. All in favor? Any abstentions or noes? Thank you.
This concludes the Finance Committee report.
Dr. Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before the Metro North and the Long Island Railroad committees make the report for the November business, I make a motion to take from the table 2 items from the October MTA Board meeting. Those actions were the contract modification between Bombardier Siemens PTC Consortium and the Metro North and Long Island Railroads, which is more fully described on pages 63 and 64 of the board book, and the 1 non-competitive procurement for Long Island Railroad for $3.1 million, which is described on page 65 and 66 of the board book.
You move those?
I move it.
I second. All in favor? Any abstentions or noes? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The railroad committees met jointly, and the committee voted, there's 1 non-competitive procurement for Long Island Railroad for $246,000. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
Second. All in favor? Any abstentions or noes? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Feinberg.
Mr. Chairman, the Transit and Bus Committee also left an item on the table last month. I move that we take the Siemens ratification from the table.
I second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions or noes? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the Transit and Bus Committee met in October, it voted unanimously to ratify the Siemens contract. That contract is more fully described on pages 74 and 75 of the board book. I move this item.
I second it. All in favor? Any abstentions or noes? Thank you.
Thank you. There's 1 action item for November for board approval. The action for board approval is to adopt an MTA policy that complies with the New York State Public Authorities Law, Section 1205. This policy requires New York City Transit to inform elected officials, community boards, customer and other stakeholders whenever there is a planned full-time closure of a subway station to facilitate station repairs and renovations, and when the station will be out of service for 60 days or longer. The committee recommends this action item, and I move it.
I second it. All in favor? Abstentions or noes? Thank you.
There is 1 competitive procurement for New York City Transit for $38.8 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move it.
Second. All in favor? Abstentions or noes? Thank you.
There are 2 ratifications, 1 for New York City Transit for $15.4 million and 1 for MTA Capital Construction for $4.9 million. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them.
Do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions or noes?
This concludes the Transit and Bus Committee report.
Thank you. Commissioner Lacewell.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Please.
I just, I wanted to wait for the chair of the Transit Committee to finish. I did want to make a comment or repeat a comment that I raised on Tuesday's committee meetings for the Sitnalta procurement for $38.5 million. I noted in the staff summary that 3 firms had opted not to continue bidding given excessive risk they felt they were subjecting themselves to under the new legislation. And I raised at that time during committee that I think that it is a very real concern. And in fact, as an agency, we've been grappling for as long as I've been on the board, and certainly before that, with the lack of competition that exists amongst many of our vendors. And that just speaks to a host of variables and factors, many of which are out of our control, and speak to the industry at large, for example, in rail. But I did want to call attention to this outstanding and open issue of these proposed debarment rules. We know, and we heard a status update on Tuesday, that the emergency rule has been extended until December 16th. And we've had some limited discussion about this, but we have touched upon this previously. But I do want us as a board to discuss modifications to the proposed rules before we're asked to vote on them. We've heard many comments. We've heard that and you've heard actually very directly from the oversight hearing on Tuesday, there's a good deal of concern about the proposed rules that we've drafted. Certainly more onerous is the contention than the state legislation, and many assembly members, elected officials, and board members have heard and acknowledged that real concern. So I don't want the proposed rules in December to be presented without the board having very rigorous discussion and understanding about how those risks have been addressed. We now know there's up to 50 comments on this from the public. And I want us to have a very thorough discussion on how we're addressing that, because we are seeing this lack of competition play out in real time.
So, Commissioner, I think your request to have discussion before the board's asked to take any action on the regulations is a reasonable one, and let's do that. Andrew, Commissioner.
I wanted to speak about the service change that I didn't hear the vote being taken on during Commissioner Feinberg's report, but I assume that it was on the M service evening proposal. But I did want to mention that I did mention this at Transit Committee on Tuesday. This represents a 50% cut in service for 14th and 23rd Street stations. With the resumption of full-time L train service coincident with this, 14th Street and 6th Avenue becomes once again a very important transfer point, and to have 50% 6th Avenue service there is a little bit disturbing. When I raised this, Glenn London mentioned that it was an expense item to continue the M all the way to 96th Street as it is currently doing, but I'm wondering if you could look at running the M at least as far as 34th Street. Many times trains have been run as far as 34th Street and turned. We may not need it all the way to 96th Street, but I think having M service from Essex Street up to 34th Street would be make a big difference for users of 14th and 23rd Street stations.
I think the reason we did not vote on it was because it was not required to be voted on. Is that correct, Monica? Okay, it's within Andy's authority to make that change, but that's an explanation for why we didn't vote on it. But I think it's a very good point, and we should take a look at going to 34th Street. It just makes sense.
Terrific. Now I'm going to ask for a motion to convene what I expect will be.
I think you wanted bridges and tunnels. We do provide a lot of funding.
You're so efficient, I thought it had already happened.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the Bridges and Tunnels Committee met on Tuesday. There are 4 competitive procurements for $55 million. Commissioner Law recused himself on the LIRO consulting contract. The committee otherwise recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I gratefully second. All in favor? Aye. Any abstentions or noes, other than Commissioner Law? Good, thank you. Now, I will ask for a motion to convene what I expect will be a brief executive session to discuss a matter related to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of a particular person or corporation pursuant to Section 105(1)(f) of the New York State Public Officers Law. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? We will return, members of the public, we will return after what I expect will be a short interval. Thank you. All right, good. Can I have a motion to go back into public session? Second, all in favor? Good. I will report to the public while in executive session, the board discussed one item and ratified the contract for the new MTA Chief Transformation Officer. As a reminder, our next board meeting is Wednesday, December 18th. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Second, all in favor? Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Abby, we good? All right, great. So just a couple of notes. On-time performance for the subways, 5th month in a row over 81%, 81.5% for October 2018. Nearly a 16% percentage point improvement over about a year prior. Similar results on Metro North and Long Island Railroad. On-time performance in October for Metro North, nearly 94%. Long Island Railroad, nearly 92%. We announced the terrific news today of the hiring of Anthony McCord to my left, and I'll turn it over to Anthony.
Hello, everyone. Anthony McCord. I'm a visitor here today. Pat asked me to come and introduce myself to everyone and let you know who I am. As you may have read, I'm a Canadian from Vancouver, Canada. I've lived and worked in many countries around the world, delivering large infrastructure projects and mainly about the services and the benefits that delivers to users and people who use the systems that the infrastructure allows us to deliver. I'm really happy to be here in New York. As a bit of a backstory, my brother and sister left Vancouver, and we actually haven't lived in the same town for almost 30 years. And the opportunity to come here to New York is an opportunity for me to move back from my brother and sister, who we all left in our careers around the world. And quite often, as is the case, you always want to go where the great opportunities are. And once again, New York is a fantastic opportunity, which is the main reason why I'm here. So thank you very much. I just have one, I would say, business comment to make, because I am a visitor here today, and that is transformation is not transportation. It's about doing some of the stuff better that customers and riders don't necessarily see. I'm also a great believer in public service and public infrastructure. I'm a train rider myself. So thank you very much.
Anthony, thank you. Jose. Okay for now. Alfonso.
Hi. I want to ask you a bit about this plan to go cashless on the Long Island Railroad. If what the union says is the case, you're looking to save about $1 million, yet the railroad's bringing in about $7 million a year in cash. So assuming you get some of that back, but it would be a lot to get all $7 million of it back. So what's the math, what's the thinking on how this generates savings?
First, it's not a plan, it's a pilot. Right, 1. 2, it's subject to board discussion and consideration at the December meeting. 3, here's the reality. The amount of cash that each of us uses in our life and the population in aggregate has declined substantially. There's no question about that. It's been replaced by credit card spending, Apple phone, Apple Pay, watches, devices, etc. Obviously, we're making great progress on Omni, which is on time and on budget and will be rolled out to the Long Island Railroad, which you care about, and Metro North, which others care about in the first quarter of 2021. I noted with my board colleagues that the amount of cash used on the Long Island Railroads declined 40% in the last couple of years. We expect that to continue. And our customers getting on at any Long Island Railroad station are going to always have the ability to use cash to buy a ticket for that ride, or for that a weekly, a 10 trip, a monthly, whatever. And what we're going to do is do a pilot to see whether the continuing decline, which in the use of cash, which is what we expect, is a prudent thing to do. If it doesn't make sense, we won't continue with the pilot, or we'll change it. Again, there'll be discussion at the December meeting. But it's not a plan. It's not decided. It's a pilot. It seems like a option that, given the dynamic I just described, makes sense. David.
Yeah, Pat, I'm hoping you can comment on the mayor's office today said that, let me just pull it up, that I had it up a second ago. The mayor's office said that they're calling on the MTA to designate zones where food vendors can sell their goods, freeing up NYPD officers to focus on keeping New Yorkers safe. So I'm hoping to get your response and then a follow-up when you're done.
Look, I'll note we saw the tweet. We're waiting for the proposal, which we'll obviously review. The city's responsible for regulating, licensing, and limiting the number of food vendors. New York City Transit's responsible for what happens in the subways. Here are the issues that we'd be concerned about. One is subway entrances and mezzanines are places with often large crowds and very limited real estate. So that's a concern. 2 is the unlicensed food vendors who've been in the news the last couple of days were unlicensed. That's a problem, right? Because cooked foods, depending on how they're prepared, stored, etc., can be a danger to public health, and that's why the New York City Department of Health's regulations presume if you don't have a license that you're an unlicensed food vendor because of the danger to public health. We're concerned about trash, we're concerned about vermin, we're also concerned about the cost, but we look forward to the city's proposal and we'll review it seriously.
So just my follow-up there is that when this influx of officers was announced in June, the issues raised were fare evasion, assaults on workers, and recidivist criminals. How did food vendors enter the picture? Why are food vendors a particular concern for you all?
Well, look, the food vendors have been in the news. We're concerned about safety and security on each of our subways, buses, Metro North Long Island Railroad, bridges and tunnels. That's what this is about. The hiring of 500 additional police, about of which 88 are vacancies or attrition, is about safety and security. I also noted that terrorism is a real thing. There was an attack at the 42nd Street and 8th Avenue station at the end of 2017. I was there with Joe Loda and Ronnie Hakem and Chief Monahan, and that was serious. And other stations, transit facilities around the world have been subjects of attack, and that's why the policing issue is so important to us.
The city has said that the MTA, being a state agency, has the jurisdiction to create its own regulations for these food vendors. I'm wondering if you feel that in these instances of homelessness, crime in the subways, food vendor licensing in the subways, do you feel like the MTA is being tasked with regulating and legislating on things that are outside of its actual purview?
Look, I think it is outside. Here are the issues, David, to go back again. We're concerned about crowding, right? There are significant crowds because 6 million of people use our facilities every day. Real estate's really limited. We're concerned about the public health issue, which anytime you have to be, when prepared foods are being prepared, they're being cooked, they're being stored, they're being refrigerated, et cetera. There's a danger to public health. The New York City Department of Health Code recognizes that. We're concerned about trash. We're concerned about vermin, which was a real priority of Chairman Loda, I'll note. And we're concerned about the costs. The city is going to make a proposal. We'll look at it seriously. Please.
Pat, oh, sorry.
No, it's you guys decide.
Okay, thanks. Pat, the transformation plan, one of its primary aims is to unclutter a lot of bureaucracy at the MTA. But with the arrival of Anthony, and this is something that either one of you could answer, with Anthony's arrival and also some new high-end hires coming on board, how do you answer concerns that there might be a separate form of bureaucratic clutter at the C-suite level that might impede what the MTA wants to accomplish?
Completely disagree. The CFO reported today that the net effect of transformation is saving $1.6 billion over the next 4 years. That's $1.6 billion that we really need to save. There's no cluttering. The staffing recommendations were in the Alex Partners report, which came out in July and was approved by the board it came out in June and was approved by the board in July. I don't see that concern.
What do you want people to know about the budget that passed? It does rely on some estimates that are better than they were earlier. No budget-driven service cuts, but there have been changes to some of the schedules. So what's the message to riders about the decisions made here today and what they should expect for improvements?
Here's what the financial plan that was presented is not based on. It's not based on toll and fare increases that are higher than inflation. That's point one. And there are no budgetary-driven service cuts. On the other hand, it was a sobering financial picture. Since July, the financial picture has gotten worse over the plan period to the extent of nearly $500 million. There are significant risks to the financial plan, and we were very candid on that. And frankly, the slide that was on the screen most was significant risk to financial plan. I think it reflects a significant amount of extraordinary work by Bob Foran and his team. I'll note that over the past 10 or so years, Bob and his team and the agency presidents have taken a couple of $1 billion of expense out. The net savings from the transformation is about $1.6 billion. That's an extraordinary amount of money. And I think it will change the MTA, the organization, in the interest of our customers, but also assure a financial stability that we're able to break even as required by state law. Clayton.
Hey, Pat. Going through some of the budget reduction items, one thing stuck out, and maybe you can clear this up for me. It's cuts to maintenance and operations. It says, so far I'm seeing that 560 maintenance and operating positions at New York City Transit will be eliminated by 2021, and we're also looking at decreasing maintenance contract expenses by more than $50 million a year through the course of this plan. Should riders and people be concerned that we might be falling back into a pattern where we're not maintaining the system?
No, I don't think so. First, a couple of things. One is those positions are achievable through vacancies and attrition, point one. Point two, we now have, for instance, vacuum trains that pick up trash that we didn't have. We've got, Andy, how many? We've got 3 of those trains. Sorry? Yeah, three new ones. So the fleet had been 2. It's now 5. Those vacuum trains, I think, have done an effective job in picking up trash. Certainly that's reflected in the reduction in track fires and the like. And then the other thing I'll say is we are talking about, Jano and Bob Foran and I testified before the Senate and the Assembly on Tuesday, and we're talking about a $51.5 billion capital plan, the largest by far in history. And the system with that amount of capital invested in is going to be poised for instance, the extraordinary increase on-time performance and the increase in the number of trains on the 7 line. When a CBTC and automatic train operation was put in place, will be replicated on the next 6 lines. These are great things for our customers. Please. Nick's today.
Well, it's 30 degrees out, so jerseys are unfortunately out of season. To Veronica's question from before, where did the 500 number come from for the police hiring? What's the idea behind picking 500 cops?
Look, the 88 of those are vacancies or attrition that's already occurred. That number was developed with the MTA Police Department and with the agencies. I'll remind everybody, right, that many of you in the room are focused on subways and buses, but the MTA police also patrol Metro North and Long Island Railroad. We've frankly had complaints from elected officials on Long Island Railroad and Metro North that they need more coverage, and the MTA police has responded to that. As I noted before, the deployments will be made by the police department leadership at the time, depending on where the greatest needs are. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail as to what we expect, and I don't expect that we'll be announcing details on the deployment, but that was the number that was arrived at by MTA management, including the senior leadership of the police department.
And so in June, we had the redeployment of 500 police officers, and the governor's press release says that it was a fair evasion task force made of 200 NYPD officers and 300 MTA officers. So are the 500 that are getting hired in addition to these ones, or are these, so the fair evasion task force officers, those 500 are still there, they're around still?
Well, those weren't 500 MTA police officers.
But 500 officers that were
the 500
redeployed.
I described, 88 or so are the result of vacancies and attrition. The others are new hires. They'll be deployed to MTA facilities, Metro North, Long Island Railroad, subways, buses, etc.
But the 500 from June, I mean, the fair evasion task force.
That group continues.
They're still around.
Yeah.
And then that had the first time that we heard about $40 million from Cy Vance's office to pay for some training for that, some technology and what have you. Then later on, when the hiring of these 500 new officers was announced, it was said that Vance's office would pay for the first 4 years of the officers from the $40 million pool of money. I mean, what is that Vance money going to exactly? To the Fair Vision Task Force or to the new hires?
It's going to the hiring of police, to the exploration of new technologies in the subways, cameras, gates, et cetera. It's one pot of $40 million, just to be clear.
Right, so it's how much of the hiring costs is it really going to cover?
I don't have a number. We're in the process of working that out.
Mm.
Dana.
Thanks.
Two questions. First, then, what is the cost of the original sort of 500 that preceded the actual hiring of 500 new
Well,
cops?
there was no incremental cost, right? Because with respect to the MTA police officers, they were already MTA police officers doing whatever work they were doing, and then part of that group was assigned to fare evasion and other things.
Okay, and my second question is that at first the MTA said the decision to hire 500 new cops was to combat fare evasion, deal with homelessness, worker assaults. Now you're saying it is also to deal with concerns about terrorism, which kind of reminds me of how the MTA sort of shifting rationale for building those bridge and tunnel towers a couple years ago. At first it was for decoration, then it became about terrorism. Why are your reasons
Before my
shifting?
time.
Yeah, but I'm sure you recall. Why are your reasons shifting?
No, I don't think they are shifting. Look, when we say that officers are deployed for fare evasion, they're police officers. They're sworn police officers. They're armed. They're highly skilled, and they're trained. And if they see crime occurring, and frankly, their presence in at least I feel this way, and I think most of our customers do, it is reassuring to see early in the morning, late at night, or when customers feel uneasy to see a police officer riding the subway, riding the Long Island Railroad. And it was never the case that officers were going to be devoted 100% to fare evasion and wouldn't do general policing. Of course, that's not the case.
Right, it's just that the rationale has shifted. This is the first time today that we heard about terrorism as one of the reasons why.
Well, no, I think I mentioned it before, including on Tuesday at the Senate and Assembly hearings. But terrorism's a real thing, right? There was an attack on at the subway station, Port Authority subway station, to go back to my prior life. And fortunately, no one got hurt, but people could have been killed and there could have been substantial property damage. Terrorism's a real thing. It's a real thing, especially with respect to transportation facilities, which have been the subject of attacks around the world, including here.
Sure. This is just the first week that issue has been.
Well, no, but the assumption, for instance, that, and maybe we haven't, and I haven't done a good job of communicating, but the fact that police officers are doing fare evasion or some other does not mean they're doing that to the exclusion of other police work. They're sworn, highly skilled, highly paid public servants, and when they're in a subway station, when they're riding Metro North or on the platform at Woodside, they're doing their policing job. Paul.
Hi, Pat. I have a couple of questions, but just sticking with the police officers.
Sure.
The 500 that were redeployed for fare evasion in June, they're separate. We're now discussing largely the 500.
But just to be clear, that's not 500 from MTA, right?
That was 300 from MTA and 200 from NYPD.
I think it was 200 from NYPD, yeah.
So the 500 that the MTA decided to hire, that decision was taken in August. Is that correct?
I'd have to check. I just don't remember.
Who decided on the 500 number? Did you decide 500 was a good number and offer them to the MTA PD, or did they come to you and say we need 500?
It was a discussion with the police department, of course.
And what's the rationale for specifically 500 officers? Why
Well,
not 250 or 1,000?
Well, here's the rationale. Nearly 20% of them, right, are going to replace existing vacancies and attrition. One. Two, vacancies and attrition are going to occur in 2020 and 2021. If you take a look at the demographic of any police department or any group of public servants, you can tell and you can estimate based on prior experience that if they've got 10, 20, 30 years of experience and they've vested in their pension or not, that over a period there'll be between X and Y that are likely to retire and have to be replaced. So nearly 20% of them are vacancies and attrition to start with. There'll be attrition in 2020 and 21 and beyond. And that was a discussion that we had with the police department.
So in a way, we're not talking about a net addition of police officers.
No, we're talking about a net addition of police officers.
But it's not a net addition of 500 if you're saying that 20% within the first year or so are actually just replacing.
No, Paul, I'd say it this way: when we hire them and fill the vacancies and attrition, we'll have 500 more officers in place than we would have otherwise.
But the police force itself won't increase by a headcount of 500 over the next 4 years.
It will be 500 sworn armed officers higher than it would have been had we not hired these officers.
So the headcount would have reduced if not for the addition of officers.
Yeah, look, attrition is a real thing in the private sector and in the public sector, including the MTA. People retire, and generally are replaced. Certainly, that's the case with respect to police officers. Most
So do you have a rough estimate in mind of how many police officers MTA police officers there will be in by the end of 2023?
Look, the police department probably, I'm sure, has an estimate as to what they can expect from layoffs and attrition. I don't have that number now. I'm not sure that I'd want to disclose it.
So, and then just my other question, which is a separate point, but talking about attrition, every time people have been talking about the transformation plan, they've been talking about up to 2,700 job cuts. I think it was the first time.
No, it's not job cuts. It's position reductions, right?
Position reductions, yeah. Okay.
Big difference.
And it's always couched as mainly through attrition. I think today was the first day where Bob said it will all be next year. How do you cut the largest percentage of jobs through attrition in 1 year? In other words, how are more than 1,300 positions going to be vacated by people rather than job cuts, like people being told you can't come back?
Because there are X positions that are open because of attrition or vacancies. So what we're talking about is a reduction in positions. A significant portion of that is going to be accounted for by vacancies and attrition. Those positions that are in that category, those folks aren't going to be replaced, and that will occur in the second half of 2020.
And what's the rough percentage?
I don't know. I'll ask Tim to get back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Please.
I want to get back to this question of hiring the police officers. As I recall, there was a terrorist attack in 1993. There was a terrorist attack in 2001. In the aftermath of either one of those attacks, has this become a recurrent request to hire police officers to deter or protect against terrorism?
So look, before my time at the MTA, here's what I can tell you at the Port Authority, which was the subject of both of those attacks that you referenced. During the time I was there, the police department created a counterterrorism unit, which I think is incredibly important. The risk, subways are safe.
Was there a request after Spain or after London?
The subways are safe. I think most of our customers feel more secure when they see police officers on trains, subway trains, Metro North, Long Island Railroad, and terrorism's sadly a real thing.
Isn't it true, though, that this request came after it was determined that fare evasion was reaching crisis proportions, and that it was really fare evasion that drove this request for added police officers in the system?
Well, no, it also followed the tragic Hoboken terminal accident of New Jersey Transit, post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Was that the reason?
It doesn't mean that one...
Was the Hoboken incident the reason?
No, but you're making a point because something A followed B, that B was caused by A. I don't subscribe to that.
You don't subscribe to it.
He's answered the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't think he has, but that's okay.
Please.
I have two questions, if you don't mind. One's related to police, one's related to Access-a-Ride. So we'll just follow up on the police. Just questions I don't think you've answered. The 500 officers, or however many ultimately, they're not going to be spread evenly throughout the system. They're going to be at, I assume, the main hubs and whatnot. But don't the NYPD and counterterrorism officials monitor the main hubs pretty closely, like Times Square, et cetera? And are they not doing a sufficient enough job? Sorry. And related to that, will the new officers get the same level of training that an NYPD counterterrorism officer would receive?
Well, a couple of things. One is I don't subscribe to the premise that they're going to be assigned to Grand Central and Penn Station. I'm not going to speak to where they're assigned, and frankly, police leadership at the time that at the times that they come on, because it'll be staged, they'll figure out where they get deployed. We're probably, as I noted before, not going to speak in detail about where they're deployed unless it makes sense to do so. They will be, frankly, I would expect that the first group that's hired is likely in large part to be people, men and women coming from other police departments. That's generally the first people on a police list that gets hired. That's the experience, as I understand it here. It was my experience at the Port Authority. Where they get deployed, remains to be seen.
And just a response, if you don't mind, can I read the city's response to the MTA's request to pay for accessorized?
Sure.
Despite being legally responsible for providing paratransit service, the MTA seems to think it's easier to extort New Yorkers for additional funds than to solve their long-term management woes or create a long-term solution. New Yorkers already contribute their required share to paratransit program. The MTA should submit to an independent audit of its paratransit system, convince New Yorkers it has its budget under control, and come up with a plan to rein in inefficient services before demanding another contribution from city residents.
Look, my response to that is that the 1993 agreement is meaningful because it represents a situation in which the city, which wasn't legally required back then to contribute a third with respect to, subject to that 20% cap, did so. What we've asked the city to do is to follow up on the meetings that occurred prior to the request, and we're asking the city to contemplate and have a discussion about an equitable sharing of this incredibly important service.
Will you do an independent audit of paratransit for them?
I'm not sure what that means. Look, the city rightfully asked for significant information when we met on the paratransit operation. If the city asked for additional information, since they're already paying a third subject to the 20% cap year over year, of course we'd furnish it.
If I could, John Samuelson basically claimed that the city was shifting money from the operating budget to plead poverty when it came to negotiations. I apologize, but I was unclear on your response.
Look, I don't think John Samuelson, with all due respect, put that on the city. Here's a response.
MTA, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
MTA, I'm sorry.
Peter, it's okay. In 2019, there was no PAYGO capital, which was the issue that the commissioner was talking about. I think PAYGO is a perfectly acceptable process. Frankly, it's financially responsible. We didn't do it in 2019 because of the extreme pressure on the operating budget in 2019, so the commissioner's request with respect to 2019 was honored. It's something that the MTA has done, as I understand it, for years and perhaps decades. I think it's a financial tool. As I also noted, that putting money into capital ultimately helps reduce operating costs. For instance, a resignal CBTC system is likely to have, especially in the first year and 3 and 5 and 10 after installation, a lower level of operating expense related compared to a signaling system that was put in 50 or 60 years ago.
But is it fair to him to think that when it comes to negotiations, the MTA is going to say, sorry, we don't have the money?
I'm not going to comment on collective bargaining agreements. That's been my approach, and I'm going to continue that. And Jay?
Yeah, Pat, I think people may look at this, people who are not up to their eyeballs in spreadsheets and all of the details of the budget, who may say, look, you guys got congestion pricing. You're going to be, as Samuelson said, flush with cash. How do you explain to people how you end up with big out-year deficits and how you end up contemplating certain changes, cutbacks, and so forth that will affect their commutes?
It's an excellent question, and the man or woman on the street needs to know the following, which is that the $51.5 billion is a capital amount. It can only be spent on capital projects. New stations, new cars, new buses, new signaling system, and can't be spent on day-to-day operations by law. The congestion of central business district tolling and the two revenue sources by law are required only to be, they're lockboxed, and they're required and allowed only to be spent on capital. And that's the reason while we may be flush, assuming the CPRB approves the $51.5 billion plan, but we are, as Bob ably described, have significant operating deficit issues in 2020, and we're optimistic about that in 21 and 22 and 23. And frankly, the numbers are large without transformation, but even with transformation, which will have an incredible impact on costs, $1.6 billion reduction, they still approach $500 million, not that far from now. Dan?
Thanks. This question is for Mr. McCord. Are you the hatchet man?
Dan, that's an unfair question, and let me address it this way. The Alex Partners report, which was delivered in June, recommended the reduction in headcount positions of up to 2,700. That was approved by the board in July. We are in the process of implementing that. Anthony McCord, who is an experienced corporate executive, is going to be leading the transformation. But the decision to reduce the headcount positions was made long before his arrival. Thanks.